All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy. And I am incredibly honored and excited to have as my guest the one and only High Fist Ruthan Badd, also known as the Cipher of MalazTube. Hey, hello. How are you, Ruthan?
Hi, Philip. I'm good. It's a huge honor for me to be here on your channel. As always, this is our 7th collab video together. Philip, can you believe it? It's our 7th one together.
Yeah.
But it's our first one without the specter of our nemesis hanging over us. So
yes.
this is our time to bond and scheme together.
Exactly. Bond and scheme. We'll be doing plenty of that because lamentably Professor Fireballs is not here. So we will have to get on without him somehow or other, but use this opportunity, I think, to ensure that we stay ahead of him somehow, because I don't know, it's pretty tough to do. He's quite a formidable nemesis, isn't he?
He is. He needs some thwarting. He needs some thwarting.
He needs some major thwarting.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if I can handle him all by myself, so I'm glad that you're here. I need a brilliant mind to help me out with this, to combat his cunning. I think we need to fight fire with fire, so to speak, or fireballs with fireballs, right?
Exactly, Philip. And, the classy and elegant thing for me to do would be to say, oh, shucks, I don't really deserve that praise. But as you know, your High Fist is neither classy nor elegant. So I wholeheartedly accept that I am indeed, what did you say, cunning and brilliant and everything.
All that stuff. So excellent. Well, speaking of brilliant, I would love for you to tell my viewers, those who are not familiar with your channel, what it is all about. What do you do on Ruthan Badd, and what are you planning to do with the channel? Anything you want to say about, and other than the fact that we all know you do pretty much everything wrong to grow a channel, which is amazing to see how well it's done, considering you, according to the received wisdom on YouTube, you pretty much do everything wrong, don't you?
I certainly do. I mean, it's not really a technical triumph, let's put it that way. That wouldn't be what people should look up to my channel for. So it's dedicated to the 10 big books. So the Malazan Book of the Fallen. That's what the channel itself is dedicated to. It's not really something that I would recommend to anybody per se. So it's not something that you should be checking out unless you want scholarly analysis of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So it's a niche within a niche within a niche, I suppose. So it was something that I started to amuse one guy, which was my friend Ishka Jarak. It turned into something that I did to amuse two guys, which was Ishka Jarak and Steven Erickson, because Erickson found me when I had like 12 subscribers or something, right? And then Erickson just shared my videos, and we got him back to commenting as well. So that was my cunning brilliance at play there, Philip, sucking him out of exile.
You have a couple records there as well, I believe. Not that I mean, you wouldn't say it yourself, but I believe that you have the most Steven Erickson comments on videos and the most shares on Steven Erickson's Facebook. Am I correct? Is that's correct, right?
Philip, I am humble, but I'm also a servant of the truth, and I must speak the truth. And yes, you are absolutely right. And Erickson has also written a short story dedicated to me. Not that I'm the type to brag.
Dedicated to you. That's amazing. It was in response to one of your videos, which is better than a comment, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's something that I will take to my grave. Possibly an early one, but I will take it to my grave nonetheless.
Let us hope not. Let us hope it's a long and fruitful life of delivering brilliant videos and other things too, so which we'll talk about. But yeah.
Thank you, Philip. I can't find any wood, but if there was, I would knock on it. Thank you.
I've got some wood here. Or here. Yeah.
Smart.
So yeah, I mean that really is amazing though, and I will say for myself as a big time fan, I think you know that the Malazan books are my absolute favorite at this point in my life, displacing my old favorite of Lord of the Rings by Tolkien. I am 100% in, huge fan. I love talking about these books. I think there's just so much richness to them, to the whole Malazan world. And I must say that there are a few MalazTubers out there who make these fantastic deep dive videos that absolutely enrich my appreciation and understanding and love for this series. And you are one of the top ones for me. So it's really an honor to be talking to you and to be able to know you. I mean, it's just fantastic. So the deep dives are fantastic. They tend to be a bit, just to warn folks, they are a bit spoilery. You don't tend to be too concerned about spoilers, right?
No, I mean, so when you enter the layer of the dragon, Philip,
yeah,
sometimes you have to sort of accept sacrifices. So one of the sacrifices that one has to make is brave the possibility of spoilers or just finish the entire series. It kind of, I guess, cuts away the possibility of growth, which is another one of the things that I do completely wrong, where I know for a fact that if I do videos which are accessible to a much larger crowd, then obviously the channel grows. But it's been the post-series discussions that's where I guess my strengths come into play as well, because this is not a critique of BookTube per se, but a lot of BookTube can sometimes be devoid of deeper analysis.
Yeah.
And I think, and I would say, once again, just one person's opinion, there's not fact. I would say, in my judgment, that this is because many content creators are too focused on spoiler-free content. It's understandable why, because that's what grows your channel, that's what attracts a larger audience and things like that. But I've always wanted to completely avoid that mindset. And once again, because the purpose of the channel is to just sort of entertain maybe 5 or 6 people now, that core group, and then I have 1,000 subscribers, which I'm extremely proud of. So it's for my subscribers now. So as long as the people who clicked on that subscribe button are happy, I think I'm fine. I don't really need new subscribers. That does sound a bit arrogant. I know what the fuck, I am arrogant. So I don't really need new subscribers. I'm quite happy with the ones that I already have. And the content that I make is for them and not for the possibility of new people joining in later.
Yeah, good. I mean, I just love that. And then there's a place, obviously, for all kinds of things on YouTube, BookTube, whatever we call it, where I totally get, because I do a lot of non-spoiler content on my channel, and they are definitely more watched than spoiler content tends to be. And I have seen over the time, especially in my collaborations with our nemesis, with Critical Dragon, Professor Fireballs, we have this ongoing collaboration for the Malazan Book of the Fallen and novels of the Malazan Empire. And what we tend to do is, on my channel, we do the non-spoiler video, and then on his, we do the spoilery stuff, because he's a bit like you that way. He prefers to get into the nitty-gritty and do the deep dive analysis stuff. Whereas I'm okay with the more general stuff, but I will say that it is an art. It's a real art to do a non-spoiler review or discussion on a particular book where you actually say something substantial, where you can do it. It's doable, but it's like walking a tightrope. It's really something, because there's the on one side, the abyss is giving away something that you shouldn't, because it's supposed to be non-spoiler, right? On the other side, as a different abyss of being too boring, because it's non-spoiler and too vague in general. So it's a tightrope walk, but I think it's something
Absolutely.
you can do. You can do it.
And your audience completely changes as well.
Yeah.
Because when you focus on completely spoiler laden stuff, I already know that a certain audience will come in for this kind of stuff, and they will get what I'm trying to do. So for instance, if I make a video which is just a crazy conspiracy theory about some character in the series being evil, and we know the character is not evil, and I make a video now saying, oh, this person is the most diabolical character or whatever, I know that my subscriber base will enjoy it and that they will get, quote unquote, get what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Because I've been making spoiler-filled content. So it's attracted a certain type of audience. Yeah. I don't have to worry about people misunderstanding what I'm trying to do. I mean, I have no idea if what I'm saying makes sense, but
yeah, well, yeah. I'll give an example. For example, some people might be convinced that you're an Animander Rake hater.
Do you see what I mean? And I specifically, I say this all the time,
yeah,
that I don't really think the character is badly written, right? And yet it's almost like at some point somebody is going to do a PhD on it, because there've been YouTube videos on it now, there've been collabs on it now, there've been sort of comment section wars on it now. It's almost like, but I've got to admit, enjoying it from a certain angle as well, because who doesn't really like being the catalyst for a good old conversation? So in that sense, it is fun, and even that is all tongue-in-cheek, right? So at Ishka Jarak's Discord server, there are memes of just me and Animander Rake and me and the T Standy or whatever. But all I can say is I enjoy the memes, because the memes are a lot more entertaining than Animander Rake or the T Standy. Let's face it.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun. And there is some kind of more serious content on your channel too that I have actually shouted out in my own videos, because I find them so, your thoughts I find so helpful on certain topics. For example, you made some, I think, really brave videos on some of the tougher content in the Malazan series. Without getting too specific, there are some really, really brutal things that happen in that world. And you made a video in which you discussed some of the specific ones that really seem to kind of disturb people. But I thought you were very eloquent in your defense of the decision to include that type of thing in literature, because literature does need to tackle things like that, because they exist in the real world. So I thought you did a really brilliant job of that one.
Thank you. And that's the type of fiction that's always pulled me as a reader as well, the type of fiction that doesn't really steer away from the brutality of the world and from the sort of the horrors that people really all around the world need to witness day in and day out. And I had no idea that these conversations would end up being controversial even within the Malazan fan base or the fantasy fan base or whatever, but I find that even there's just a lot of, I mean, it just shows that some of these stories resonate across cultural barriers. They might not be resonating on the same meters. So there might be someone who sort of, let's say, identifies with some kind of progressive political party in Canada who can enjoy the Malazan Book of the Fallen. There could be someone who's in Japan who subscribes to some kind of conservative political party there, who can also enjoy the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So because there are so many different shades there, that's one of the things that makes the 10 Big Books so enchanting. There's just so much there that can be dissected through a cultural perspective. Whenever I speak to people about it who live in different parts of the world, I always end up getting a new perspective on it, which is something that makes it very enjoyable.
That is a beautiful thing, I think, about being on BookTube, as well as the international nature of it. I would pretty consistently 40% of my subscribers are here in the United States, and that means the 60% are from all over the world. And I love that, particularly for a series like the Malazan books. because it is a world where diversity is front and center. It's a very diverse world with a lot of different cultures, a lot of different peoples, a vast and very, very layered history. So I really enjoy that. And I think that maybe one of the reasons why it is, I feel like anyway, it's one of the well-known fantasy series that has a very international following. Did you agree with that perception?
Yeah, I certainly would, because the thing is, yes, there is a lot of diversity in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, but the magic is that the diversity is never tokenistic, because there are many works of fantasy that have diversity, but they can often feel very tokenistic. True. The reason this resonates with readers from around the world, and just look at the variety of accents on MalazTube. Look at the number of people making YouTube videos on Malazan videos, and just go through the diversity of accents that you find. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So, I mean, even when you, AP, and I do a collab, that's essentially a collab with 3 people from 3 different continents. Yeah. So you're not really going to get this with many works of fiction. You might get fans, but will you get people who have really immersed themselves into it and who've taken it as sort of a learning experience? I mean, I would put the MalazTube lineup against any line of content creators about any other series or book, and I'm pretty certain that we will be the most culturally diverse group. Yeah. Okay. And you can say this. You make series like The Lord of the Rings and A Song of Ice and Fire and things like that. Do they have casual fans all over the world? Yes. But do they have people from all over the world who are willing to engage with it seriously? I'm not too sure. Yeah, I wouldn't have to follow up on that, but I can say for a fact that I really enjoy the content of people like Niflrog, for example, who has yet another accent, or Counselor of Moonspawn, you know, with yet another accent, representing people from, like you say, all over the place, which is really a beautiful thing, for sure. And all bringing their own insights and experiences to their interpretations of this really magnificent series. So, but yeah, wonderful. Let's step back a little bit though, to the days before the Malazan Book of the Fallen, to little young Ruthan Badd, who must have been a very cute little fellow, I imagine. I was a heartthrob, Philip.
I'm sure, yeah. So let's go back to those days and let's talk about your reading journey. I always like to get to know a person through, don't you think a person is in some ways a product of all the stories that we've consumed, that we are in some ways the stories that we engage with. So it's kind of fun to get to know a person through that person's reading journey, I guess is one way to put it. It's sort of cheesy way to put it, but there it is. So what were the books that you started reading as a young person, and eventually we'll bring this back to Malazan and how you got there. But let's start with some earlier stuff. What are some of the books that make up Ruthan Badd?
So I grew up in India. So there was there still is a comic book digest series called that comes out, which has been running for decades.
What's the name again?
It's just a collection of comics, and Tinkle, Comics.
Okay.
It's just stories just put into a comic book type format, and that's what we used to read. Our mom found, when I mean my brother, I have a twin brother, so the two of us would essentially experience things together because we were twins. We were kind of like, I mean, Malazan fans would get this. We were kind of like envy and spite or whatever. But
okay, cool.
when we went to the library for the first time, we got a whole Archie Comics. Do you remember Archie Comics?
Oh yeah.
So we completely devoured that for about a year. We must have been about 7 or 8 at this point.
Yeah.
And we went through a phase where we just read all that. We then found a new library which had Marvel and DC comic books. So we transitioned into that. And we got into DC, and this is in a little corner of Chennai in India. None of our friends knew anything about comic books. This is before the movies came out. So we used to read the Avengers and the Incredible Hulk and Iron Man, and we were Marvel fans. We would read DC once in a while, but at the core, I mean, X-Men, Fantastic Four, we used to love all that. So we transitioned from that into, after that was when we kind of branched out. There was a school carnival that happened when I was 12. I remember this vividly. This is when I came into contact with my first ever novel. There was some kind of weird competition that I won. I was one of the kids. And there was this secondhand book called The Negotiator. It was by Frederick Forsyth. And it was he's a British thriller writer. And I was 12 at the time, and I was like, what's this? It's a big book. I've not really read a big book before that. The biggest book I'd read at that point was a book called Swami and Friends by R.K. Narayan, who's one of the most well-known Indian writers who wrote in the English language. So the biggest book I'd read was Swami and Friends, which was like 100 pages or something like that. So this was about 400 pages. It was a proper thriller. I read it. I didn't really get it. I mean, when I think back now, it blows my mind that I even followed a bit of it, because Frederick Forsyth thrillers are extremely dense and complexly plotted, and he has a journalistic way of writing these books. But for whatever reason, The Negotiator paved the way for me to find and read other Frederick Forsyth books, and I ended up reading all his books.
Wow.
At that time in school, the kids used to read, there was another British writer called Geoffrey Archer, who was very famous in India at that time. So I remember many of my classmates used to read Geoffrey Archer, and I would be like, oh, no, Frederick Forsyth's my guy, right? I will read Frederick Forsyth. When I think back now, that's helped out so much in my career and other things as well, because that introduced me to a whole new world of geopolitics and strategy, espionage, counterterrorism. He was really ahead of his time in many ways. He wrote about oil tankers being hijacked. The Devil's Alternative is a book he wrote in the 80s, which is about an oil tanker being hijacked by Ukrainian separatists.
Oh, wow.
Right? So this is way before Somalian hijackings of oil tankers. This is way before the disintegration of the Soviet Union, and then Ukrainian separatism now coming back to kind of haunt them and things like that. So his book, The Day of the Jackal, is one of his most well-known books. It's almost like a manual on how you assassinate a president. He goes into very intricate details. How do you get a fake passport? How do you get a fake ID? It's brilliant. Wow. And in fact, there was an assassin who was caught, who was arrested with a copy of The Day of the Jackal in his kit. So
wow,
all of Frederick Forsyth's books, when he was at the peak of his powers, were just phenomenal. The Dogs of War is about American and British mercenaries taking over a small republic in Africa. And the book actually gives you details on how you plot a military coup and how you get a bunch of mercenaries to overtake an African republic and all the consequences and all that. So that was my next level of reading.
How does he know? Just
from there,
for a second, how does he know all this? Did he work in espionage himself?
So he claimed much later that he was an MI6 agent all along and all that. But that generation of espionage writers were all known for detailed interviews with the chief of intelligence and the people involved. So Len Deighton and Jean Le Carré started this espionage trend where they would write extremely well-researched political espionage thrillers. Jean Le Carré wrote The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, which is brilliant. He wrote Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, The Little Drummer Girl. I mean, they're all brilliant novels. So, and then the Americans kind of took over with Tom Clancy and Robert Ludlum and all that, where there was still, so Tom Clancy still did put a lot of research into his thrillers, but kind of there were popcorn elements that were then added and all that. American thrillers were always different. But so that was the next genre of fiction that I used to read, which was espionage fiction with all these different guys.
Wow.
And from there, I think I moved on to nonfiction from there. I started reading manga. I started getting more interested in nonfiction when I got into college.
Okay.
So V.S. Naipaul is a huge influence. I would say both his fiction and his nonfiction are brilliant. He's one of the most brutally honest, most there's a cynicism in his analysis of the world, but there's also a humor in his analysis of the world that I always found extremely compelling. Christopher Hitchens was a huge influence, both in terms of being a writer and in terms of being a mentor. I was a big fan of Go Vidal, who's a great American writer as well. Yep. Go Vidal wrote Go Vidal wrote a book called Creation, which I still consider to be one of the greatest works of fiction that nobody knows about. Creation is about a historian's journey at around 500 BC. So 500 BC was a spectacular time in world history. Most of the major figures that we know today, Confucius, Herodotus, the Buddha, many people, sort of the Bimbisara kingdoms in India. So this is about a journey throughout the world set in 500 BC, and he meets many of these important people. So it's because one of the things I always hated about reading nonfiction history was that even the ones that tended to claim to be about global history would only speak about, maybe there would be mentions of the Chinese, Genghis Khan, blah, 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 but it would predominantly be Western history, let's face it, right? Yeah. It's kind of like how people tell you that they're history buffs and you get excited and you then find out that all these guys know about the sort of Romans and the Greeks, right? They couldn't really have a conversation with you about the Assyrians, about the Tang dynasty, which is considered to be the greatest of the Chinese dynasties, about the Cholas, who are arguably the greatest seafaring empire of all time. They can't really have these conversations. It's all about the Romans or the Greeks. So Creation was a huge, that was a hugely impactful reading experience for me because it covered world history throughout. He actually talks about ancient India, ancient China, ancient Persia, and things like that. So I came into fantasy quite late. It was only after this that I came into fantasy and all that. And that was because of my interest in comic books. So I'd always liked Robert E. Howard's Conan the Cimmerian stories. I loved those. So I figured I might as well try something with a bit more of an epic flavor. And I picked up this book. I'm so glad that I did, because this book sort of cemented for me that I do want to read more in the genre. It was called The Heroes, and it had just come out at that time by Joe Abercrombie. I knew nothing about the trilogy that preceded that. So there were many in-jokes and references in that book that I understood later on when I reread it, but at that time I had no idea. And just characters like, what's the guy's name, Wirren of Bly, the funny, so great. It was like, if this is what this genre offers me, then I'm on board. So I read the George R.R. Martin books. I then read the Mistborn trilogy after that. I read the two Patrick Rothfuss books. Whatever people told me was good. And I finally came to Gardens of the Moon, and I wasn't really that impressed with Gardens of the Moon, to be honest, as in I was impressed with it. Right. But did I actually think that I would be Ruthan Badd someday? Not at all. Right. So not at all, because at that time, my journey into the fantasy genre and looking at fantasy as literature itself was a new mindset for me
Yeah.
that I was getting into. So
Nice. So
it was it was.
I
Yeah.
have to pause for a moment to ask you.
I
So
can keep rambling, Philip. You know that.
oh, I love it. No, ramble all you want. But I do have to pause to ask you, if you are Ruthan Badd, does that mean your twin brother is Ruthan Good?
I wish I could tell you that the answer was yes, but he might be Ruthan Badder. Who knows? That would be more appropriate.
He's Ruthan Batter. And also, I had to follow that up with, is he also a fantasy reader and a Malazan reader? Have you gotten him to read Malazan?
No. So getting him into One Piece took about 9 years.
Okay.
So he's balls deep in One Piece now, and he's even gotten his entire group of friends to read One Piece now. So he's gotten a big group of One Piece aficionados. So, but he's never really been a reader of novels.
Okay, so maybe by the time you guys are 80 or so, you'll have him reading Malazan.
Maybe. So he's more into the art. So he does animation, comic book art, and things like that.
Cool. Yeah, and I came to, honestly, my journey is similar to yours in some ways. As a kid, it was all comics. I loved comics, and I was also a Marvel guy, much more than a DC guy. So I think that's the cool people, right? The ones who are.
I bet AP was a DC guy.
Oh, he was such a DC guy. I think he even has like a Batman kind of paraphernalia probably that he hides under his
Of course he does.
Yeah. But or Superman even, maybe. Do you think he's that lame? Maybe. Yeah.
I mean, it's AP, you never know, Philip.
Yeah. So but anyway, yeah, definitely Marvel all the way. For me, X-Men particularly. I also loved Spider-Man as a kid. Yeah, so I was, before fantasy, it was all comics for me. And then my first fantasy was actually Lloyd Alexander's Chronicles of Prydain, which is a very Welsh-based fantasy. And then came Tolkien. So, but yeah, I'm so glad that you read Abercrombie, and you've read all the First Law stuff since, or how far?
Yeah, I read the First Law trilogy, and I read another one, read something a while ago, which is like a sequel where Logan's an old man. Yeah, exactly. So that's about it. But I became an Erickson guy after that. So once I sort of switch allegiances, Philip, I become the general. I have no time for the enemy.
Yeah. So you're all in terms of Malazan now, but we have to talk about now. I guess that's a good explanation of how you got into Malazan. You just picked up Gardens of the Moon, and at first it wasn't really blowing you away, I guess.
I mean, as in it was, but it was really confusing, and it was quite clear that finishing the series would be something that I hadn't really done before. The sort of the skill that was required to finish these 10 books was not a skill that I knew I had, because I have read, so I've read Patrick O'Brien's series, Master and Commander and all that. So there are like 24, 25 books there. So I've read that. The Horatio Hornblower series, Wilbur Smith has the Courtney and Ballantyne series. I've read those. So I have read big ones, but for something on this scale, I knew that it was something that I hadn't really attempted before. So that was something that always kept me at a distance. And it was also quite clear that this was not really going to be a series where I would get what I wanted, where leaving the reader disappointed or pulling a fast one on the reader is something that this guy loves doing. So that became quite clear as well. But once I finished the series, I warmed up to it. It took me a while, but I did.
It was similar for me. I read the Malazan Book of the Fallen on my own the first time, and it was something that I knew I was going to need to reread because A, I loved it and I thought it was brilliant, but B, I didn't really I knew there were things I was missing, and I thought, I think I need to reread this. And I also probably want to read all that other stuff I hear about, the Esselmont books and the Carcanis trilogy and the Bocalane and Corbel Broach books and all that other stuff. And we got to talk about that too, obviously, because you are a Bocalane and Corbel Broach guy. There are not a lot of you out there who are how do we put this? The proponents of Bocalane and Corbel Broach. Are they, in fact, your very favorite Malazan tales?
Absolutely, without a doubt. And it's all because of Bocalane. Bocalane is, my God, my pick for the most enjoyable fictional character ever written.
Yeah.
Right. If ever there was a universe where I would want to be a character, even though real life characters in that universe don't tend to do very well, but if there was ever a fictional character whom I would be, in professional wrestling, there's a term called mark, which is different from fan. So a fan is someone who knows that the entire thing's a work, who knows that the entire thing's an illusion. Right. But a mark is someone who's you're just starstruck and you buy into the entire thing. So I'm a complete mark for Bocalane. Wow. You could you could sell me a Bocalane mug that I didn't need, and I would part with half my wealth for it. If Steven Erikson lived next door, I would be speaking to him about the Bocalane stories until he got tired of it. A lot of people ask me why I haven't collabed with Erikson, right? And of course it's flattering. Of course it's flattering that people feel that a conversation between Erikson and I would be interesting, and it's flattering that people want to see that. But I mean, come on, let's face it, guys. A collab between Erikson and I is just going to be 2 hours of Erikson just sitting there regretting his decision while I try to convince him that the Bocalane stories have to be the kind of center of his existence, and he needs more we need more Bocalane stories, right? He wouldn't get a word in edgewise. It would just be me telling him. It would be like, what's that Stephen King book where the author gets kidnapped by the super fan?
Misery. Yeah.
So that's what would happen if Erikson lives next door, and it wouldn't even be about the Malazan books. It wouldn't even be about the 10 big books. It would be about the Bocalane novellas, right? So.
Good Lord. Well, and which is why our previous collaborations have been on the Bocalane and Corbel Broach novellas, all 6 of them, in fact.
6 collabs.
Yeah. And I think I don't know anyone else who has put out videos. Do you? On the Bocalane and Corbel Broach books? Are you aware of any?
I think Andy did a book review.
Oh, okay. Andy Smith.
Of one of the volumes.
Of one of the volumes. Okay. All right. That's true. Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah. So other than that, though, I am not aware of anyone else doing videos on the Bocalane and Corbel Broach. So this is our realm, Ruthan Badd. We've got this covered. Right?
It is an acquired taste. One cannot deny that. One cannot deny that you need to have a certain sensibility when it comes to humor to understand what's going on, right? Because it's kind of like Monty Python and Airplane, but taken into a much more grotesque level of zaniness. Yeah, it's grotesque zany humor is what it is.
Yeah, and that's description.
So if you don't have a taste for that, then no amount of fanboying from my side would change a person's mind. And Malazan itself is an acquired taste. Steven Erikson is an acquired taste. I know this is not a fashionable thing to say. Sorry, my dog's
it's okay.
For attention.
I like dogs. It's okay.
So I know it's not a popular thing to say. I've often been accused of being a gatekeeper or whatever, but I would say that Steven Erikson himself is an acquired taste, and the Bocalane novellas within that are even more of an acquired taste. Your palate has to be able to take a great deal of spice. Let me put it that way. So the more spice resistant the top of your mouth is, the tastier this curry will sort of taste or feel or whatever.
Yeah, I had a chance to ask him about that sort of when I was talking with him and with our nemesis on A Critical Dragon, and also Ian Esselmont was there, and I mentioned how I actually sort of asked the two of them, is it the case that the Bocalane and Corbel Broach novellas sort of embody the spirit of the gaming more than any other of the Malazan books in terms of just the weirdness and the fun of it and everything else? And Ian Esselmont agreed right away. He said, yeah, actually, I think so. But Erickson disagreed and said, no, I don't think so. He had a different answer to that question. It was a fun discussion on AP's channel. But I do think that you can find within the Malazan Book of the Fallen plenty of moments that are Bocalane and Corbel Broach-esque. I think that humor exists in the Malazan world. It's just that in the Bocalane and Corbel Broach novellas, it's front and center. It's everything, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so you could call the Rat Catchers Guild, for instance, an example of zany, grotesque humor. So you do find that all over the series. You're absolutely right. But Bocalane is such a compelling front man for that madness. So he's a philosopher, he's a sorcerer, he's funny, he's sometimes intentionally funny, he's sometimes unintentionally funny. He's sometimes the big fish in a small pond, he's sometimes the small fish in a big pond. He makes an argument that goes one way, and the minute it doesn't work out for him, he convincingly works out an argument that goes the other way. He's just such a compelling character, right? I guess he hits my reader G-spot or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I guess so. And he's also, of course, not alone. There is Corbel Broach, who is a good foil in some ways. He lacks the eloquence of Bocalane, but he definitely plays an important role in that partnership, wouldn't you say? Aren't the two of them together?
Absolutely. So
yeah,
I would say all three of them. So Bocalane, Corbel Broach, and Emancipor Reese. So that trilogy works out extremely well. I guess my point is that it was because of Bocalane that I got hooked onto these stories, but the others are magical as well. I mean, they are my favorite stories for a reason, right? Despite the hate that they get, despite the fact that many people don't really find those stories to be Erickson's best, I would still argue that they are Erickson's best. 100 years from now, people will remember the Bocalane and Corbel Broach stories as being Erickson's best. Sorry, my dog's kind of,
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, if your dog even wants to come to camera, that's fine with me. But
no, I'm go on.
No. I was just going to say that I do think that they bring an element that is very important to Malazan, which is the humor. And it's Malazan is a series that has so many layers to it that a reader who wants to be there for epic action is going to be very satisfied. A reader who wants to be there for a bit of deep dive, a lot of thinking, because you mentioned before how it was intimidating to read the series because of its scope, because of its vastness. But I also think there's some depth there, which you don't have to read it for that. You can read it and enjoy the action and all of that. But it's there, it's a masterpiece in that it needs so many of these different levels of reading simultaneously. And for me, one of the most essential levels in there is the humor. I really think that is one of the things that, and you could say that it does the opposite of elevate, but that's a necessary thing sometimes. You have to bring the story back down to earth sometimes. You have to bring it to a level where and then sometimes it's cathartic. I need that humor, that makes me, sometimes I don't know if I'm laughing or crying because there's just so much going on and there's a bit of humor that comes, and it's like a pressure cooker valve, and all that steam comes out in that moment of humor. So I think that the Beauclerk and Corbel Broach novellas are probably a place you could go if you're interested in seeing that humor, but taken to a degree that you don't even see in the Malazan books.
And it's also a great example of just how much variety one writer can achieve, right? The fact that the person who wrote certain great epic moments in the Malazan Book of the Fallen is also the guy who writes about cattle cartwheeling in the air because of some funny explosion in the Healthy Dead. And it's hilarious, right? He makes the destruction of an entire kingdom with people being slaughtered and all that. He makes it hilarious in the Beauclerk stories. So it's a great example of variety, and it's also a great slap on the face, even though it's not meant that way, to many of these writers who sometimes pose as method actors. And they're like, oh, I need to get into the minds of my characters. I need to get immersed in my world. I need to do this, blah, blah. And they take decades to write one book, and they make the entire thing look like some kind of huge, large, it's like they're Michelangelo, right? I'm Michelangelo and I'm now sculpting the Sistine Chapel or whatever it is. And here you have a guy who's powered through 14,000 pages in a decade. And he's also managed to write these zany stories on the side, which shows that he hasn't really been mentally affected by having himself immersed in the darkness of the Malazan series. As you said, there's a lot of zany humor in that as well, but the Beauclerk stories are a great example of both variety and of an author not being supposedly consumed by the darkness of what they write.
Yeah, well, maybe that's what they're for. Maybe they serve a personal purpose as well. These novellas. I've never asked him, but I guess that's a question we could ask him: is writing these novellas a kind of a relief in a way? Is it a release from the more serious stuff? Although I will say that there are there's some depth to the Beauclerk and Corbel Broach novellas as well. If you want to be do a literary analysis, there's material there for you. There are some really important themes that he incorporates in there too.
Please let me know if you're interested, because I would gladly start a Beauclerk channel where I'm called Emancipor Ruthan or whatever. I don't really care. I would start a Beauclerk channel.
I was wondering why you didn't take on a different Malazan name. I mean, Ruthan Badd is classic. It is you. So, I mean, it's there to stay. But I wondered why maybe you didn't go with something like, I don't know, Boca Lame or something like that, or I don't know, something Beauclerk and Corbel Broach themed, perhaps.
So I mean, the thing is, Philip, since you and I are interested in Hinduism and Buddhism and all that, you and I know the power of names and the power of being named, the power of a name being bestowed on you. Yeah. So I never really chose the name Ruthan Badd.
Oh, okay, we have an origin story here. Good.
Yes. So on Ishka's Discord server, I was just a guy who would change my name all the time. One of which was, as you said, Beauclerk. So really? I would either be the actual names, or I would have bad puns of each of their names.
Huh. No, I did not know. Just full disclaimer, I did not know that you went by Boca Lame at one point. I did not know this.
This is way before Philip and I even knew the other person existed. Yeah. Right. So this is way back when. And I logged in one day, and Ishka Jarak had named me Ruthan Badd, because my actual name is Nilanthan Niruthan.
Oh, okay.
So Ruthan is a part of my name. Yeah. So that name stuck. So once a name has been given to you, Philip, you know how powerful that is.
I know. AP gave me the name Dr. Fantasy, essentially. So,
there you go. And you named me the Cipher of MalazTube. So these are the titles which give us power.
These are sacred things. These are very sacred things. And I, in turn, I think very benevolently gave AP the awesome nickname of Professor Fireballs. So, I mean, and it was just sort of destiny, I think.
You know, I mean, listen, it's worked out well for him.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think so. Perfectly describing him, I think.
Yeah.
But Iskar Jarek is responsible for this. Okay, so, and this is somebody that I think of as sort of like the godfather of MalazTube. He is,
Yes.
we all owe him an incredible debt of gratitude. He has been the most encouraging and wonderful persons I have met on YouTube. I remember in the early days of my channel, I was just sort of making videos about different series that I considered to be the best of fantasy. That's where I got my silly name sort of for the channel, is the best of fantasy, this, that. And I just thought the first thing I'd do is just make a bunch of videos about series that I considered to be really great literature. Because really one of the points of my channel was to argue fantasy can be great literature. And here are some examples. That's how I started out. So I made one, of course, on the Malazan Book of the Fallen, because I had read it a few years before and was blown away and knew that it was great literature. And I think it was Iskar Jarek who sort of introduced me to a larger community on YouTube, on BookTube, because he saw my video and I think he shared it with people, and he just sort of, here's this guy out here who's talking about Malazan, so let's embrace him, And that's how he is. He's been like that. Just an incredible, generous spirit. Don't you agree?
I mean, absolutely. He is the godfather. If MalazTube was made into a movie, it would be him sitting at the table at his daughter's wedding. That would be him, without a doubt. And it would be Erickson asking him for a favor or something. I don't know. But Ishka is certainly the godfather of MalazTube. And listen, back then, the idea that a channel dedicated to Malazan was a bold, mad act of genius.
Yeah.
Because even finding random Malazan videos was next to impossible.
Yeah.
The fact that he didn't care about viewers, and he just went in right there for this Malazan fan base. Yep. That is what spawned this entire thing. That was the first event, the first cause, which led to all these atoms that are Ruthan Badd and Quick Gen and Niflrog and Raf. And all of us, Council of Moonspawn. All of us started YouTube because of Ishka. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, and the others who are in that sort of group as well. I think Really Good and Kind had a channel beforehand. Perhaps?
He did, yeah. And he has his own sort of Discord server as well.
Yes, it's actually a very active Discord server. One of the few that I actually peek in every once in a while, because as you know, I'm not very active on Discord, but sometimes I like to say I'm like a Bocaral, that I'll just kind of peek in and then dash out again, especially in Iskar's Discord. So I'm there occasionally, but yeah, he's just such a generous spirit, and I think a lot of what exists now, and I think it's fair to say that we can say that Malazan is now well served on BookTube. We can say that there's some good content out there for people who want to know more, who want to be in conversations about the Malazan Book of the Fallen, especially. And I'm trying to do my best to sort of push that out a little bit. As you know, I'm a big fan of Ian Esselmont's work as well. I think that it does brilliant stuff. And of course, I've got videos on the 2 Carcanis books, and our 6 videos together with Professor Fireballs on the Bocaline and Crumble Brooch books. And we're going to be finishing up pretty soon, I hope, AP and I, with the Dust of Dreams and Crippled God, and then A Sail. But beyond us, I mean, there's just so many great MalazTubers out there, and people starting the series. I'm in conversations now with some newbies, some people who are new to Malazan Book of the Fallen, and that's a great fun thing for me now.
That's right. I think I was there for one of the live ones that you did about a month ago. Yeah, yes, I remember that. There. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I remember that.
Yeah. You were there on Steve Talks Books. You were in the
Yes.
chat. Yep. And there's a great group there, and you were very helpful in the chat there. So, because I blanked on a couple things during the conversation, and you were giving the right answers there in the chat, and that was great. And we did have a Dead House Gates discussion as well. That same group, and it's so gratifying to me to hear from people saying, "Wow, this thank you for making these videos because they've really helped me to love the series even more," that sort of thing. And that's like music to my ears. It makes me feel kind of humbled, but also really happy. And I'm sure you've had people on your channel, probably people more often who have read the entire series, because that's the nature of
I have absolutely nobody who's sort of thanked me for getting into the series. I've had a lot of people ask me why I spoiled them on the series, but hey, these are spoiled. I mean, you're a mirror version of me, Philip, in the sense that you've done everything right in terms of getting a community together, building that community, networking with the other content creators, right? Making sure that everybody knows each other. I am kind of a just this phantom that weaves in and out of this circle. So I mean, I'm glad we can serve as the yin and yang of MalazTube, right? I guess that's why AP is our nemesis, but it's interesting as well because with you, it's like you and AP are polar opposites. But with AP and I, it's kind of like we're kind of a bit similar in many ways, especially in terms of our outlook on certain things and our sort of our desire to be contrarian sometimes and our desire to be the critic sometimes and all that. So you and I are mirror opposites, Philip, which is a compliment, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a place for all that stuff. One of my personal private missions is to somehow trick AP into doing like a tag video or something, because I know he'll never do it. But it's good to have goals that you'll never accomplish, because that keeps you chasing after something, right? So
exactly, and we all know that tag videos and book haul videos are the most intellectually stimulating sort of content on the internet.
Exactly what it's all about, right? Yeah.
I mean, a click on the like button, guys. We make AP do a tag video and Philip do a book haul video. Come on, let's get it done.
Yeah, I've never done a book haul. I do have pretty much everything else, I think, on BookTube, and I didn't even know what those things were when I started out. I had no idea what a TBR was, or a tag, or book haul, or book unhaul, or any of that stuff. So all that stuff was new to me, and I'm like a kid sort of wandering into a candy shop, finding candy that I didn't even
and going, what the fuck is this candy? Book hauls, what is this?
And then trying some and think, hey, this is kind of fun. So I think it'll be fun to get AP to do something like one of those things, but and to see his reaction upon eating this kind of candy for the first time. So but we'll see what we can get him to do. But it is true that some of you MalazTubers are infrequent, I guess. You mentioned all the things you do wrong. One of them is you don't post videos on a regular basis. It's sort of like when life permits, or when the muse inspires you, or that sort of thing. Is that how it works?
I mean, it's more like, so I'm kind of like a force of nature, Philip. I'm a calamity, right? So you can't really predict when the meteor strikes the planet. It just happens, and after that you need to deal with the consequences. So that is the delusional rationale I have, that I'm simply a force of nature who can't be controlled. The actual reason, of course, there is a serious reason behind it, which is that I'm extremely lazy. Right, so I can't really stick to a schedule and do stuff. And I think the reason my videos have all had a certain amount of variety is precisely because I just do whatever strikes my fancy when I feel like making a video. So that also lets me hit many different types of topics and ideas that even I might not have actually thought of had I said, okay, on Friday night, I need to record a video.
I think I understand the distinction now, because you were talking about earlier how you're sort of like AP, but I think what it is that I'm good and Professor Fireball
AP is bad and I'm ugly.
No. He's evil and you are chaotic. That's what you are. You're chaotic, right?
Excellent. I like that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So good. And then you have Professor Fireball's clearly evil and nefarious and all that. And then you are the chaotic element. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you don't know how to paint me in a larger than life light, Philip. I will give you that. You've given me the Cipher of MalazTube, and you've now given me the Agent of Chaos. Or no, I'm the Avatar of Chaos.
Avatar of Chaos. There we go. So the High Fist, the Cipher of MalazTube, and the Avatar of Chaos. I think that those are pretty good titles, right?
I mean, listen, I am the king of monikers after all. So, and look at the quality of the name givers, Philip. You, Ishka, Jarak. So, it's all the whatever. It's all upwards from here.
Yeah, it's marvelous. Well, I think that we've covered Malazan. We can come back to it if we feel like. But I am curious, you mentioned Abercrombie and other fantasy that you've read. Do you think you'd ever go back to reading other fantasy? Or have you, in fact, read other fantasy since Malazan? And as a follow-up, would you ever make videos on anything other than Malazan?
So I might, but not on the Ruthan Badd channel.
Okay.
The Ruthan Badd channel is for the 10 big books. The only sort of entity that can make me break that rule is the Baukelin sort of stuff, which is why I have broken that rule, and which is why there's a lot of Baukelin content on Ruthan Badd. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yes. Well, I mean, that rules are there to be broken, especially if you're the Avatar of Chaos. But yeah, and of course for Baukelin and Corbel Broach, I think you would break any rule, wouldn't you?
Including murder.
Well, considering that they're necromancers, that's probably appropriate. But what about the ice stuff? Would you ever have you read? I actually don't know. Have you read Esselmont's books?
In 2014, yes.
Okay.
But I haven't really revisited any of those. It's not that I have anything against ice, right? In fact, I tease Ishka a lot about this, and I kind of ham it up a bit because Ishka is a huge fan of Ian Esselmont. So to him, it's Steven Erikson and Ian Esselmont. So
yeah,
So I sometimes kind of wind everyone up on Discord. I used to do this a lot. I've not done this in a long time, but I used to wind them a lot, saying, ice sucks, right? Erikson's the only one who can put a sentence together. Ice is terrible and all that. I mean, the reality is I do like Ian Esselmont's books. The books that I read were extremely enjoyable. The fact that the characters were characters that I recognized, that was extremely enjoyable. But to me, it's the same as all the other writers. So I could be a booktuber, which is what you asked, and I could sort of cover other content on my channel. I could become a booktuber of sorts. But I mean, once again, after the engagement that Erikson has shown me, do I really need to waste my time acknowledging writers who might not have the time to acknowledge me? And I know that sounds quite arrogant, but I mean, look, in my own career, I'm an internationally published writer. In my own career, I've written for some of the best journals in the world. I write academic stuff, obviously not fiction, but in my own field, I am a big deal. So the fact that Steven Erikson engages with me makes it a two-way process, which I'm not going to get with other writers. So why bother?
Yeah, his fan engagement is absolutely one of the wonderful things about him, one of the many wonderful things. I mean, it's just A-level fan engagement. How many other authors as successful as he is? I know plenty of authors who are just trying to get going and trying to get their foot in the door, and they're more willing usually to get engaged with little booktubers like me, you know, and that sort of thing. But Steven Erikson has sold millions and millions of books, and he will talk to anyone. He will talk to anyone. It doesn't matter if you're big or small. In fact, I have a feeling that he really enjoys talking to various folks, and it just doesn't seem to matter to him what he gets out of it, other than he enjoys talking to people about his books. So
watch some of his earlier interviews where he's asked some of the cringiest, most ignorant, annoying questions, and he still has to put up with it. So for him, dealing with you guys, having conversations with you and having conversations with many of the other content creators out there. I think I was there for one of the live conversations with Jimmy Nuts.
Oh yes,
I think I was there. Yeah, I think I was there for that. So Erikson must really love you guys, because you guys are finally giving him a level of engagement that many previous people who interviewed him unfortunately didn't. I used to feel really bad for the guy. Some of those interviews from back in the day are still available on YouTube, and the interviewers, it's very clear that they haven't even read the books. They have no idea what they're dealing with here.
Yeah, no, in defense of some of the others who maybe have read the books, it is hard to come up with really good questions for an author, because there is a degree to which an author doesn't want to talk about their book, because once an author says, this is what I meant here, that could have the effect of stifling conversation. On the other hand, I personally do not believe the author is dead. If you take the extreme form of that view, I think that I love hearing what an author wanted in a certain book, or what an author intended, let's say, within a certain book, with the understanding that, okay, well, maybe the author intended this, but it's gone somewhere else, with various readers have taken it somewhere else. And does that mean that's invalid because the author didn't actually intend that in the beginning? I don't think so. I think a story takes on its own life. Like Shakespeare, for example. If you look at Shakespeare, did Shakespeare intend 1/10 of the stuff that people have said about his plays? I seriously doubt it. But does that mean all of those analyses are invalid? I don't think so. I think that these layers have been added and enrich perhaps a person's experience of those plays. So I think that something similar is happening with Malazan, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say that's an interesting point with religion itself, right? If we kind of zoom back to a much bigger sort of question on the point that you just mentioned about the author being dead, we would be dealing with religious doctrine where the intent of the original doctrine might be X, but the way it's interpreted in modern times might be Y. Right. And sort of that conversation's always going to continue. And just as how that conversation exists with our interpretation of religious texts, whether you look at, so with Buddhism, whether it's Mahayana Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism. With Hinduism, is it Shaivism or Vaishnavism? With Islam, is it Sunni or Shia? This whole idea of the original intent of the author and the way that it's sort of interpreted subsequently. Juno, no, sorry, my dog is once again.
No worries.
That exists with religious texts, and it makes sense that it exists with literature as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Totally agree there. But back to the question. So about other fantasy. If you were to make a different channel, then fine. You don't have to put it on. You can keep the pristine nature of Ruthan Badd. Keep it pristine and pure. Only Erikson.
Yes.
Although I note that you have not made videos on Carcanus yet.
It's the 10 big books, Philip.
Plus Bocalian and Cobalt Roach.
Yeah, I mean, so Bocalian and Cobalt Roach is an exception to that. But the general rule is that this is for the 10 big books.
Okay, fair enough. But let's say you start another channel. And you say, okay, I'm going to do some other fantasy. I'm going to talk about other fantasy now. What are the fantasies that I can expect to be on this channel? And we got to come up with a name for it too. Yeah,
I mean, so it would be I would discuss Joe Abercrombie.
Okay,
for sure.
All right.
No, I would discuss the Discworld series for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so that would certainly be a big influence. I like the first 10 or 12 Harry Dresden books. I'm
Okay.
not a big fan of the first 2 or 3, but it does get substantially better as
Yeah.
it goes on.
I'm on
I
book
would
5
certainly,
now. Yeah. So yeah.
okay, okay. So it certainly keeps getting better for the, once again, for the enjoyment factor. And I mean, come on, I have a hard on for intelligent wizards, Philip, you know that, Quick Ben, Baukelane, so
Yeah.
John Constantine. Harry Dresden kind of fits that bill quite well. So
Yep.
I kind of enjoy that type of stuff. There would be a lot of Japanese, there would be manga in there for sure. So
Ah, okay.
I'm a big fan of that genre. There would be a lot of comic book stuff in there. I might discuss A Song of Ice and Fire in terms of character breakdown. So I think Euron Greyjoy is one of the best fantasy characters, one of the
Okay.
most terrifying, compelling, powerful fantasy characters, especially the bits that we've seen from the new book where Martin's just released a few passages, and the way that his storyline's been built up with hints here and there that he's the storm and he is the apocalypse,
Yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah.
I think so. Tyrion Lannister, there are a couple of characters in there whom I wouldn't mind doing complete 20-minute or 25-minute analysis pieces on what makes them great.
Okay.
So I might do, yeah. So that would kind of be. I did like the first. What's that? The Name of the Wind, the Patrick Rothfuss book.
Patrick Rothfuss. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you read?
I really enjoyed that. Yeah,
have you read Mark Lawrence yet? Mark Lawrence.
I have read. So I read the first book, the one that starts with the 14-year-old boy brutally massacring the village.
Prince
So
of Thorns. Yeah.
yeah. Someone told me that a second trilogy was better.
Well, if you're not interested in something quite so grimdark, yeah. I mean, the second trilogy, Red Queen's War, has a very different tone. In fact, it's not grimdark. It has its grim moments, but it's not grimdark. It's about, fundamentally, I would say it's about friendship, and it's a really beautiful story. The Red Queen's War trilogy. I like the first trilogy too. I like Broken Empire as well. I think Lawrence is one of the smartest writers out there in fantasy right now, and I've said that many times. But I just said it because
the main character was very compelling. I think his name was Jog, if I remember right.
Yeah, you might say Jorg or Jorg, whichever.
Jorg, yeah. I mean, forgive the. I'm a third world savage, Philip. Come on. So Jog was an extremely compelling character. I think the problem was I started reading that on a plane, and once the journey was over, I had to move on quickly to something else. So I might pick that book. I stopped where his father had given him some kind of mission. He had gone in there and he kind of he killed some guy in front of his dad, and his dad then gives him a mission to do something, from what I remember. So I just need to go in there and pick it up again.
Yeah. I know where you were. Yeah. I think he's a brilliant writer. That's why I mentioned, because I just feel like if you get that far into it, especially with Red Queen's War, I think you would end up liking those two trilogies, which are they take place at the same time in the same world. And there are cameos from Broken Empire in Red Queen's War. And Broken Empire makes more sense after you've read Red Queen's War. They're very intertwined that way. But he's a writer I feel like you would enjoy, because it's got humor. It's got I think the depth that you seem to like in your reading. And it's just a little bit perverse in some ways that I think you would enjoy as well. It's challenging though, because a lot of people do read Prince of Thorns and think this is horrific. I'm supposed to like this guy, and no, you're not actually supposed to like him. You're not. I think that without spoiling anything, I personally felt that where he ended up was very appropriate, and I felt profound in some ways, actually, at the end of it, because you get to the end of it and a lot of things sort of fall into place. It's one of those things. At least it was for me anyway.
I mean, just finding out that Jog was like a 14-year-old boy in the first couple of pages after you've just witnessed the massacre, that itself is, a very memorable moment.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, there's some stuff in there that's very disturbing, but the same is true of Malazan, which I continually argue is not grimdark for me, and I think you probably would agree. I know who cares?
Oh, Philip,
what all that means, but
look, I would say it's grim. I know it's grim and I know it's dark, right? So if the question of whether the two of them together, does it make up grim dark or does it not? To me, I know Malazan is grim and I know Malazan's dark.
Yeah.
So if you believe that the two of those put together is grim dark, then it's grim dark. If you believe that grim dark is something other than grim and dark, it's not grim and dark.
Well, here's my argument. Hear me out, and then you can tell me why I'm wrong. Okay.
Oh, I've watched all your videos on it, Philip. Don't worry. Yeah, go on.
Okay, you already know then. But the way I'm articulating it these days, to myself at least, and when people ask me, I feel that it's not grimdark because, and first of all, you've heard me say this before, but it's not about body count. It's not about violence. That is, you see that in every fantasy, classical fantasy. Read Tolkien's Silmarillion. You won't find a higher body count anywhere. I mean, there's a lot of dead people and elves and stuff in Silmarillion. So it's not that, because nobody would call Silmarillion grimdark, right? So it's not about the violence. Yes, there's violence. In fact, I would argue that in a lot of grimdark, the violence tends to be more real, more realistic, if you want to put it, or verisimilitudinous, to quote my nemesis. So you have, I think, an honesty about the violence in grimdark that people find disturbing because it is honest. It's not glorified. It's visceral. It's gross. It's disturbing, as violence should be, right? So that's grimdark to me. But I also think that grimdark is fundamentally existentialist. Okay, I think that grimdark is existentialist in that, at the heart of it all, there's a sense that the universe has no meaning, that there is no intrinsic meaning to the universe. There is no benign creator out there who is looking after you and making sure your life follows a path or anything like that. You're on your own, pal, and it has no intrinsic meaning. But you can carve out meaning from this universe by acting, by doing, by going out in the world, by putting on your boots and strapping on your sword, going out in the world and doing what you do. You make your own individual meaning. So that's existentialism, essentially, to me, and that is what grimdark is. Malazan is not grimdark because there's your favorite word in association with the series, compassion, which is, okay, horrible things happen, and compassion isn't always the answer, but it is something that is consistently explored in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. It is all over the place. It is explored in many of its nuances. I see it as an underlying, underpinning, transcending value. And you don't have that in existentialism. You don't have anything that transcends. Individuals make their own meaning. But in Malazan, you have compassion, you have empathy, which transcends. All individuals can learn compassion and empathy and can have these moments of incredible connection where there's somebody who is your bitter, most awful enemy, and suddenly you realize the humanity of that person. And as readers, we get that, and the characters within the story get that. So for me, because of that thread, because of that emphasis, very deliberate on that theme of compassion, which is an underlying transcending value of the series, it's not grimdark. Okay, so now blow me apart here. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Look, we're all sort of civil gentlemen here, Philip. So
yeah, of course.
You and I are allies against Apto Canavalian, obviously. But
yeah.
So here's the thing. So let me sort of provide the audience with some context, right? So from what I remember, the string of videos about whether Malazan is grimdark or not started when I made a video on a certain proto-human tribal practice that we see in book 9 of the series. And the title of that video was, the name of that practice
Right.
and what it means for grimdark. And this kind of then spawned a whole bunch of videos by other MalazTubers, and it spawned a kind of debate over whether Malazan was grimdark or not, right? So I only have two basic reservations with the points you made, Philip. So I agree with the approach that you've taken, and I completely agree that the reason you've given me is quite sound if we go with those assumptions. So, for example, if we are to go with the assumption that existentialism is a mandatory component for this genre called grimdark,
right,
then what you would say, I would have to agree. But I guess for me, grimdark comes from, and maybe this is because my introduction to grimdark fantasy was Joe Abercrombie, right?
Which is very existentialist.
So, it is, right? And once again, maybe this is where our understanding of existentialism sort of also might become a little sort of problematic, right? Because to me, because that world was so full of irony, because that world was so full of tragedy. For example, in The Heroes, which I told you was my first book into this genre of literature, there's this excellent battle scene where multiple people die in one page. It's all told from the first person perspective, and where it's a normal guy and he's thinking about home, and then he dies. Someone from the other side comes, takes his ring. This guy has a fiance back home. This guy dies, and it's just a series of people dying. To me, so to me, that is so much more philosophical and well thought out, and sort of that carries so much moral weight, and it carries a sense of humanism as well to me. That to me, Malazan fits very well into my understanding of grimdark, because to me, grimdark is it's not just that it's grim and it's dark. It's the world that it portrays. So there are many set pieces even in the Malazan world where children die, where the evil flourish, where the noble sort of have fates worse than death. So from that sense, and I am also very uncomfortable with the idea, and once again, this is certainly not your intention, nor am I claiming that it's your intention, but I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that a work can be sanitized per se, simply because of a certain perspective that it takes, regardless of whether it's existential or not, regardless of whether it's optimistic or pessimistic or not. To me, Erikson has taken a huge risk, and grimdark writers who are the best in the genre usually take that risk, and they end up bringing that humanity out of the darkness. I mean, Joe Abercrombie has great humor. Stephen Erikson, as we discussed, has great humor. So to me, that humanizing is a big part of the grimdark genre, rather than being something that differentiates something away from it.
Okay, I'm going to agree with you there. And I agree that both authors humanize in very important ways. But I also would argue that at the end of the day, in every first law book, which I admire greatly, Abercrombie's a top 5 author for me. So this is not a criticism. But at the end of the day, I feel like the characters end up alienated. They are not connected with one another. And that's kind of, there's this kind of, you could call it realism or pessimism, or as I have done, existentialism, but I feel like they are alienated. Whereas with Erikson's books, the emphasis at the end of the day is on connection, is on the feeling of transcendence through connection. So that for me is the fundamental distinction there. And they both have violence. They both portray terrible things. But Erikson takes it one way and Abercrombie takes it another. And they both are posing questions. I mean, I don't think either author is just coming down and saying, this is how the universe is. And, I don't think that either one is doing that. But I think there's a difference in emphasis on the paths that they go. And it's kind of like with Mark Lawrence in Broken Empire. He goes the Abercrombie route, where you fundamentally feel alienation in a way, but with the Red Queen's War trilogy, he goes the Erikson route more, where it's really about friendship. It's really about connection, and that transcends all this stuff that happens in the meantime. So I don't know. That's my take anyway, is that it's alienation versus connection. And so grimdark, not grimdark. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can also see where the sort of difference between the springs, because I always have this term that I use called Ericksonian humanism. So
yes. Yeah.
that's something that he keeps keeps bringing up. So I see that as an example of something that can be done even within the grimdark genre, whereas you see it as something else. So the fundamental difference between, so I see Erikson as a writer who's doing something different within that grimdark world. Yeah, whereas you see him as existing beyond that, or you see him transcending that or something.
I see him doing something different from it. Yeah, fundamentally, at the end of the day. I think that's, you have to get to the end of the series and then see what they're doing. For me, grimdark is actually a response within fantasy to modern literature. Because if you look at most fantasy, you'll see, and in my opinion, and there are smarter people who have expressed this than I am, such as Stephen Donaldson, for example. I did a video on his 2 essays okay, cool. So you know what I'm talking about when he talks about fantasy as a literature of reintegration. He's talking about not grimdark. He's talking about older fantasy. He's talking about myth. He's talking about it has the capacity to make us feel that not only are we empowered, but we're part of this, all the life around us, the sense of connection. And to me, he spotted Malazan and said, this is what I'm talking about. He actually, in the second essay, that's probably one of the most fundamental points, is he's saying this Malazan series, this is what I'm talking about. This gives reintegration. This gives you a sense of connection, of transcendence. Whereas,
and I mean, can I just point out that, and the reason for that is because for Donaldson's reintegration thesis to sort of hold sway, you need a non-Tolkien-esque work of fantasy. Because what's essentially kept fantasy away from its mythic roots, I would say, is the over-dependence on going back to Tolkien for every single thing. And because Stephen Erikson isn't really inspired by that, because he sees this much more in the line of myth making rather than, so Tolkien did what Erikson did, which is create his own mythology and imbibe it with a kind of mythical, larger than life magic, which you need to build into the thesis that Donaldson was trying to build.
Yeah, I agree. And he gives Tolkien, as in his first essay, as his primary example, and saying that, well, Tolkien does something that, because if you look through time at epics, and you'll notice that humanity has been sort of downgraded. We went from, in Beowulf, for example, being this magical being who could defeat the monsters, who was larger than life, who was powerful and strong, to years later, I think he gives the Fairy Queen as an example, where we're no longer the powerful being. We're in a world that's magical and full of wonder, but we are ourselves pretty mundane and uninteresting. And you go from there to Paradise Lost by Milton. And there, we're actually really a side thing. It's Satan and God and all this epic stuff. And we're just sort of this like thing over here on the side, Adam and Eve having an argument. And then you go to Tennyson's Idols of the King, where essentially this kind of heroism is no longer even possible, that we're in a world where humans are simply just flawed, and we're morally corrupt, and we're alienated, and things fall apart, et cetera, et cetera. And then Tolkien does this. He pulls a trick. He creates his own world where he says, okay, in this world, which is not our world, we can be heroic again. Okay, so that's a different thing that he's doing, but he sort of revived the idea of humanity being epic, of us being not only having meaning, but also being connected with one another. And so Donaldson admires Tolkien for that, and gives him a very important place in this sort of evolution, I guess. But I do see grimdark as fantasy's response to modern literature, which is, I think Donaldson is correct, when he asserts that the majority of modern literature, let's say in the 20th century to today, emphasizes our alienation, emphasizes our lack of meaning. In fact, I think it's fair to say that literature that, like a lot of fantasy, is looked down on as genre fiction and all that. I think it's fair to say that you're seen as a bit naive. You're seen as a bit simple if you assert meaning. Whereas if you just sort of give this sort of, look at us, we have no meaning, we're ridiculous, we're absurd, and tragic and alone and alienated. That's serious literature, right? That's the majority of serious literature today, is always emphasizing.
If I could literally write a story where I'm an extremely greedy man and I then turn into a statue of gold.
Yeah.
And they would say, oh, wow, that's magic realism. That's a parable for greed. That's an analogy for whatever. That's not genre fiction. Whereas if a witch cursed me for my greed and I turned into a statue of gold, now it's genre fiction. Now it's fantasy. It's not literature. Oh, wow.
Exactly. And this was my problem with Salman Rushdie. When in his essay, I did a video on that called Why Read Fantasy. I was basically responding to Salman Rushdie, who said some beautiful things about incorporating the fantastic into literature and what that can do. And I totally agreed with him there. But then he turned around and he just pooped all over the whole genre of fantasy by essentially saying, oh, but I do magical realism, and these people over here are in this ghetto, this genre fiction ghetto, and they're not doing what I do. They're not serious, la-di-da. So that obviously got me a little bit, even though I admire him, I think he's a great writer. I think that that's unfortunate, that tendency for some writers who use the fantastic to try to distance themselves and say, oh, no, I don't do that. That's genre fiction. I do magic realism. I'm serious, right? So,
I mean, and Salman Rushdie's been a major proponent of that. He's been the biggest proponent of that. I mean, I understand that when he was coming up in the 80s and all that he had to really break through a lot of barriers in terms of having overtly magical stuff being accepted as fantasy in the UK, and then sort of the children of the empire now writing in the English language. And Salman Rushdie did do a lot to change prose and what was accepted as a work of literature and things like that. But he's essentially I read that article and I saw the collab that you and AP did as well, where AP was a lot less courteous than you are now, right?
Because he's Professor Fireballs,
Exactly, right? I mean, he did throw some fireballs there, which, I mean, some of which sort of literally immolated Salman Rushdie right in front of my eyes, right? But at the end of the day, when I went back and read that article, or the sort of the passages that you had pointed out, because I think there were two bits that you had pointed out in your video of statements that he made, and he was kind of I think he was referring more to the Hunger Games, Twilight type stuff that was constantly seen in commercial fiction. And I was like, you know what? Many Indian writers, particularly Bombay writers whom Salman Rushdie grew up with, have this problem where to this day, they have this compulsive need to create this dichotomy of commercial and critical fiction. You see that with Bombay cinema in Bollywood.
Oh, yeah.
You see that with Bombay-based writers. I mean, Salman Rushdie, even though he's a British writer, the Bombay in him has never really gone, right? And you look at many of these Indian writers who won the Booker Prize and all that, many of them have this compulsive need to shit on commercial fiction.
Yeah.
And Salman Rushdie, in many ways, I suppose, is a reflection of that part as well.
Interesting. Yeah, that's probably part of the dynamic. There are plenty of other authors too that we can point to who do fantasy, science fiction, who try to say, "Oh no, I don't do that." Right? I'm much more serious than that.
Isn't it amazing that Shakespeare and Charles Dickens and all these guys who are taught in modern day colleges and all that were
Yep.
quote unquote commercial writers.
Yep. Shakespeare was trying to get butts in seats, or in his case,
Exactly.
groundlings standing up in to see his plays. That's, I mean, he was,
It was popular commercial fiction.
Yep. Yep. Which is why you have a lot of really, pretty crude humor. Not that, the crowds there, the groundlings, wouldn't have appreciated some of the deeper aspects, I guess, but he had everything in there. Kind of like Malazan, he had everything in there. There's such a range when it comes to Shakespeare, because he knew to get the people in there and to entertain them, he had to give them all these different levels. So you had royalty, perhaps, sitting in the back, and they got to sit, of course, in the circular balcony area, and then you had the rest of us schmucks there getting wet because there's no roof over the groundlings. But
I would be at the back with the royalty, Philip, but the rest of you schmucks, yes.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yes, because the high fist would naturally be in the back with a roof over his head. But
and a slave mark on my back,
well, hopefully not. But yeah, no, I think that it's unfortunate to see writers that I respect, like Salman Rushdie, feel that they need to do that. I think that I obviously can't psychoanalyze him or anything. And as I said, I think, he's a brilliant writer. I love Midnight's Children. It's a brilliant book, and all of that. But I just feel it's such a shame. I feel my heart break a little bit when I see writers like him try to make them, and this is my interpretation, but I feel like he's trying to make himself ennobled by it's a classic bully move. You put down someone else to make yourself look better, and that's what bullies do. And he's kind of an intellectual bully when he does that. Maybe that's not how he thinks of it, but that's how I'm reading.
And what do bullies do? They project the persecution that is imposed on them. And what Salman Rushdie did with that distinction between genre fiction and magic realism is essentially what his earliest critics did to him, which is claim that what he was doing cannot be considered literature because it was about superhumans born at the stroke of midnight in India.
Yeah. I mean, it was some crazy stuff. Midnight's Children is a brilliant book. And it has so many layers of meaning to it, and it's hysterical.
The premise is almost like an artsy literature version of the X-Men in some senses.
Yeah. It's a brilliant book, and what he does with colonialism in there, and what he does with, it's a really obviously vastly important time in South Asian history, which the repercussions are still with us very much. And so it's a really important book, I would say. And there's so many truths conveyed through these absolutely absurd and supernatural elements that it's a brilliant book. And I'm just sad that
Go on. I was just going to give you a fun fact about Salman Rushdie.
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
So one of his books that he wrote about Nicaragua was dedicated to my mentor, Christopher Hitchens, because it was in Christopher Hitchens' house that Salman Rushdie was protected for many of his trips to the United States when Ayatollah Khomeini put a bounty on his head. So it's called the Jaguar something, which is a non-fiction book that Salman Rushdie wrote about Nicaragua, and it's dedicated to Christopher Hitchens.
Isn't that cool? Yeah. And this is sort of, my wife's going to kill me for saying this, but I have a sort of a private debt to Salman Rushdie, because I met her because a friend of mine was returning a book by Salman Rushdie. This was actually the one that got him in trouble, that got him the fatwa, Satanic Verses.
The Satanic Verses.
Yeah. So my friend was returning the book to the person who would become my wife. And I went along with him for the ride, just to, had tea at her house and met her that way. And she mentioned she was doing translations of short stories from Nepali to English. And I volunteered to help her polish the translations. So, yeah. That's how we met.
So it was literally Satan who brought you together, not Bad.
Yes, this is true. Yeah. So yep. That's a personal debt to Salman Rushdie, beyond the fact that I do think he's a brilliant writer. But the point is, I think it's a shame when you have writers like that trying to carve out a special place for themselves and put this wall between them and other writers who are really doing very similar things. Because where is that line? Where's the line between fantasy, genre fiction, and what we call magic realism, or whatever you want to call it? Where's that line? And nobody can paint that line for me. Okay, it's just blur. It blurs. You have brilliant writers in fantasy, like Steven Erikson, like Mark Lawrence, like Joe Abercrombie, like Robin Hobb, like N.K. Jemisin. You have Ursula Le Guin. You have all these great writers who are fantasy writers, who can say everything just as profound as anyone who calls themselves, a writer of literature. It's all literature. It's all storytelling. So I think it's detrimental to and
so this is my crude distinction between the two, and it might not hold up. It's just a Ruthan Badd definition.
Okay.
Right, a sort of line between the two.
Okay.
So the way I see it is this: if the magic is used to serve some kind of moral or storyline point, it's magic realism.
Okay.
If it's an inherent part of that world, it's genre fiction.
Okay.
Which is why I gave you the example earlier. So if I'm a greedy person and I turn into a statue of gold, that act of magic is to give the reader the morality tale of greed being wrong. I mean, I remember reading a work of magic realism where the main character turns into a fish at the end, right? Whatever it is.
Right.
So if you look at Salman Rushdie's type of magic realism, that's what it is. Whereas if you have fantasy as part of that world, like Hunger Games or a Steven Erikson or a Harry Potter or a whatever, then it would be quote unquote fantasy. I mean, this is kind of like me saying grimdark is when it's grim and dark, right? These are extremely rudimentary definitions here, but what I typically tend to find from the Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Salman Rushdie type crowd is that the departure from reality is for some purpose. Whereas with typical fantasy fiction, the existence of magic or defying the laws of reality is just something that everybody there has to deal with anyway.
Okay, I mean, it's a clever distinction. I'm not convinced that you can't have both in the same story, though.
You certainly can, which is why the distinction sucks, which is why Philip, keep up, Philip, which is why Salman Rushdie is wrong. That's the whole point. But but that's what I think they are on about.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's probably where he's coming from, or at least where he's pretending to come from, in drawing that distinction. But reality is all these different works. Just take Malazan, it does all that stuff and more. And it's a
work of literature.
It's a masterpiece that should be read 100, 200 years from now, right? Yeah. I hope
Philip, have you 1,000 years from now would be good. Philip, have you ever seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or Once Upon a Time in the West?
No, but I need to see it. Obviously, it's an important.
So one of the writers who had a big impact on me, who was not really a novelist, was an American film critic by the name of Roger Ebert.
Oh, okay.
Roger Ebert, of course, extremely famous, wrote many reviews and all that. So yes, Siskel and Ebert, they were a two-man duo, but Roger Ebert wrote his own reviews. He had his own sort of column with the Chicago Sun or something, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So my brother and I were obsessed with Roger Ebert reviews for a while because we're big movie buffs. So I remember him writing an article about The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and he wrote this, 2003 or 2004, when the movie was a classic, and he included this in his category of greatest movies ever made. And he said, when I first saw the movie, I gave it 3 out of 4 stars. He gives good movies 3 stars. He gives great movies 4 stars.
Yeah.
And he said, because I didn't believe at that time that this could be art. I didn't believe at that time that this could be great cinema.
Yeah.
But now, 45 years later, I know that this was great cinema. I know that this was great art. So works of fantasy, I'm pretty sure there will be a certain generation that comes up which determines where the bar is set, where many of these things kind of change. Malazan will be seen as a work of literature in the future for sure, but there will be many people right now who are of the mindset that it can't be literature. And that mindset will change eventually, like how it changed with Westerns and cinema in the 60s.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. It is, I hope that people will be learning, you know, like I learned Old English from, 1,000 years ago. People will have to learn our times English in order to read Malazan in 1,000 years, or depending on how much the language changes, because it is that good.
They would be like, this sucks. But hey, what's that about the 2 necromancers? That seems good. Let's take a crack at that.
Yeah, let's learn whatever they'll call our English at that time, so that we can read Bulkley and Crumblebroach. Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, hey, what's going on here?
Whoa! What's going on here?
Who's this?
Whoa!
Speak of the devil. Speak of the devil.
I was just telling Philip why I could never have a conversation with you, Mr. Erickson, because it would just be 2 hours of you sitting there without being able to get a word in edgewise while I try to convince you that the Baukelane stories should be the sort of fulcrum of your life. And if you would allow me to make a case, so I had no idea that you were here, but Philip, was this your doing, or was this?
Maybe.
Okay. Anyway. Okay. Anyway, so Ms. Erickson, thing is, firstly, I do understand that you're quite starstruck, but calm down, take a deep breath, Ms. Erickson. So
thank you.
The Baukelane stories. Oh, there he is. Okay.
Oh my God! It's Professor
stories.
Fireballs. Oh my goodness!
With a horrible wig. Oh no, that's just AP. Yeah. Sorry about that, AP. I haven't been. So I was just telling Mr. Erickson that 100 years from now, in fact, Philip and I were just having that conversation. In the future, when they uncover the sort of Ruthan Badd library of Stephen Erickson books, what the societies of the future would resonate with, what societies of the future would actually find a rewarding reading experience. This surreal, by the way, I'm actually speaking to Stephen Erickson, guys, anyway. So they would be the Baukelane stories, because the Baukelane stories are what capture the essence of humanity. It's grotesque, it's compassionate, it's hilarious, there's violence, there's philosophy. So I guess my point is that you need to sort of really get working on these stories. I mean, fuck the sort of whatever trilogy without the main character in it. Forget about the where we want our mother, we want mommy, T. Stanley, right? Forget about all that nonsense, right? I'm pretty sure there are many fans out there who enjoy that a lot. I don't begrudge them anything, but you have to think of the future, Mr. Erickson. You have to consider your legacy here. For how long will you live for these suckers who don't appreciate you, right? For how long will you bleed for these people who have no idea what to do with your blood? The Baukelane stories will be your legacy will surpass Ayn Rand's legacy once you kind of really get that gear going, the Baukelane story. So I mean, I think I've made a genuine case here, and I think I've done a good job being coherent, despite being blindsided by Philip Chase, that the guy I have an entire YouTube channel dedicated to will just turn up in the middle of nothing, but
Steve, please.
Yeah.
Please, I am a traditional old-fashioned man, and you will be Mr. Erickson, unfortunately.
Okay.
I'm gonna let you
should
two,
warn you. There's only two. There's only two more Bokalane stories, because there's 9 in all, and so I'm closing in on the end.
Mr. Erickson, read the Stephen King novel Misery, and you need to understand that I have a passport that does enable international travel, right? I might be a third world savage, but I can get to places when I need to.
I'm going to leave you guys for a moment to be starstruck by Ruthan Badd. I'll be right back. All right.
Yeah, take a deep breath, guys.
So, Ruthan, what I understood from the context of what you were saying there was, in the future, when people are looking back on the rise of the world dictator that took over the entire planet, Ruthan Badd,
yes,
that they're going to be looking for these formative books that helped shape you into that worldwide dictator, and they're going to point to the Bokalane and Corbel Brooch books as the legacy that shaped a dictator. Steve, how do you feel about that?
Oh, well, I'm thrilled, obviously. Yes, because I'm sure he'll be a benign dictator.
I'm Mohammed of Ghazni, and Stephen Erickson is the Prophet Muhammad. Yes, his ideology is what drives me to conquer the heathen masses.
Sounds good.
I mean,
So how are you both doing?
AP?
Well, I've been having a day that was part of a week. So we'll just leave it at that.
So I'm currently in India. I was just telling Philip this before we started recording. I'm currently in India, so the situation back home is not that good. So I had to kind of have a change of location to a new place so that I could get things started again. Yeah. So that, I mean, 12-hour, 13-hour power cuts, hyperinflation, curfews, riots, there's all kinds of stuff going on back home at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
But you're safe and well?
I am, yes. I mean, I am one of the privileged few who sort of has another option. I can just come to India. So here I am, and I've sort of, I'm in the process of starting my own business as well. I'm opening up a strategy business, a strategy consultancy. So that, my PhD, I'm working on a novel, as I was telling Philip, and AP was AP was kind enough to read the first couple of pages and give me his feedback. So yeah, so I'm quite a busy refugee. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
Right. So you got AP's feedback. That's like 4 hours you're never going to get back, right? Off those 2 pages. Yeah.
I mean, trust me, I was expecting something far more brutal, but I think AP had a lot of compassion and empathy for me. AP understood that this was something that was a huge sort of experiment for me in terms of whether my own ego would be able to handle it. Would my own ego be able to handle apto-Cannavalian sort of treatment? It turned out it was one of those Chanter Brothers stories that the critic did like, right? So AP did. Philip, can you cut this next bit off because I need to reveal something?
I will try to edit it out. Yes.
Philip, just pause recording now for a second, and then we can start recording again.
Okay.
I mean, we need to sort of.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. We've been having a great time talking about Professor Fireballs here and there. In fact,
I was just telling Philip that this is our 7th collab video together, and the first time we're kind of free of AP, because we've done 6 collabs and AP is always there. And this was going to be our big bonding conversation where we just spoke. And well done.
I was dropping by to say hello. If you would prefer for me to leave, I can leave.
I mean, come on, AP, you know me. I need someone to punch back when I punch. So what better punching back / sparring partner than you, AP. Philip
Well,
knows that.
I would hope that the feedback that I gave you about your work was slightly better than perhaps the feedback that Apto Cannavalian would have given anyone writing creative
Wait, is
stuff.
there a difference?
I was just going to say it sounded awfully familiar, but it was a humble version. It was a humble version. Let me say that.
But I have to know one thing, just one thing, Ruthan Badd. Did AP change the names of your characters?
He didn't, but he did make a certain logical suggestion, which was fair because in my story, because in South India we use our first names, right? So if I was going to be a colonel, I would be referred to as Colonel Nilan, which is my name, not Colonel Niruthan, which is my father's name, right? So because here many of us don't have family names, we just take our father's names. So in my story, even the people with official titles were addressed with their first names. So the main character is a guy called Vidal, because I was just telling you that Go Vidal was a huge inspiration, blah, 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 right? So the main character is a guy called Vidal and people call him Commander Vidal. Whereas AP pointed out that he should be called Commander Adefon because his name is Vidal Adefon anyway. No,
well, you gave my characters joke names, so.
Philip, let's face it. AP has always been a lot more brutal with you than he has with me. I mean, AP's taken a few shots here and there at me, but AP's always kind of been measured with his jabs. Whereas with you, I mean, AP's kind of hit you with a wide variety of weapons at this point. So you should not.
Yeah, I'm wearing the elbow patches just in case.
But it was actually the point that you're just talking about is really, really interesting because just to go all sort of narrative stuff for a second. If you're writing for a local audience that understands that a convention, a naming convention, then that's fine. It works because your reader, that your reader is going to understand what you're doing. But if you're writing for a different audience that there's another way of interpreting it, then of course that can lead to a misunderstanding because I was misreading this as familiarity between the characters, whereas that's not what you intended. And so as soon as you explained it to me, I went, oh, right, that makes perfect sense. But I didn't know that from the context. So that's where bearing in mind who your readership is can actually influence or alter how you approach what you are telling your readership.
Yeah, and which is why you were the only one who pointed it out, because I showed this to my brother had a read. He didn't pick it up because he's my brother and he's from the same culture. I showed it to two of my friends, none of whom picked it up because they are both, one is Indian and the other Sri Lankan. So I had to go to sort of a white devil, AP, come on. So I had to go to the white devil for me to get the truth. Winston Churchill was so right. Anyway.
But I mean, but there are craft related solutions to that, right? You signpost that early on, and it should be pretty easy for a reader to pick up. I think it doesn't strike me as something that's a fail or anything like that. It's just a question of framing it properly. So
yeah, but if you're unaware that an audience will interpret it completely differently to how you've intended it, then you can't add in that context to get everyone to understand the context. Because if you take it as a rule that this is how it's always perceived, and that's what we talk about in terms of implicit bias or unconscious bias in writing, that you make an assumption about how someone is going to interpret what you say based on what you believe are shared beliefs or shared understandings of situations. And that's why, a lot of the time we talk about trying to think about how your audience is going to interpret what you do. And Steve, you as a writer, you write things and you go, in order to explain this to an audience, and you try to conceive of a rough audience, what is it that is going to be necessary for them to know? But if you've never considered your audience, the whole, what is it necessary for a reader to know? They're just going to know what I tell them. You always have that in the back of your head, I think, as a creative person, some consideration of audience.
Yeah, but I mean, this is kind of your job as an editor. It's what an editor would do, right? Is you highlight the assumptions if they are problematic in a story, and then once you've done that, then the writer goes back and sorts it out, fixes the problem, or rejects your premise to begin with.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So Nilan, you're in very good company, because I am now surrounded by 3 people whose work that I have commented on, and at some point they've gone, "Oh, actually, he has a good point here. No, he's completely wrong. I hate him. I'm never speaking to him again."
I'm at that point. I just private message Philip that I hate him. I'm just joking.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. See, so I mean, the thing, the sort of the most fun thing for me about writing was this idea that if it does pass the acid test, so to speak, as in if I did show it to a few people whom I knew would give me brutally honest feedback, I knew that that would be life-changing for me, because writing fiction is such a different skill from what I do for a living, which is writing and teaching nonfiction.
Mhm.
So, and I've always written first pages. I have 1,000 unfinished stories where it's just the first page, right? And it's always something really cool, like someone stuck in a war zone or someone who's just found a dead body. I mean, it's just horrible and unreadable when I go back to it now, but I knew that if I could show it to AP, and if I could just get AP to say, all right, go ahead with this, right? This is something that would be possible. It would be a whole new skill set that I can now think of. It opens up an entirely new possibility of life, of careers, of essentially, I mean, possibilities in many different ways. I'm not looking for this to be some kind of giant monster bestseller. I'm just looking to know that I can write something that's entertaining and that's funny, because I know a lot of people who make very, very analytical points about certain things, but they can never replicate it. I was just telling Philip earlier before you guys joined in about how I was a big fan of this American film critic called Roger Ebert, and how he gave the Sergio Leone films 3 stars, the Westerns 3 stars when they first came out. But about 45 years later, he accepted that The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and For a Few Dollars More were great films, but that at the time in the 60s, he thought they could not be art. And similarly, when you look at people like Salman Rushdie and all that, AP, don't worry, we've had a 15-20 minute bashing session, right? So your memory was well served, AP, have no fear. But that eventually it will come to a point where many people who feel that fantasy cannot be literature will have to look back at stories like the Malazan Book of the Fallen, like maybe a couple of other select stories, and they will have to say that this is literature. Kind of like how they had to look back at Sergio Leone's Westerns 45 years later, and they had to acknowledge that this was great cinema. So in terms of I guess the reason I brought this up was because of the critics, whatever, right? We were speaking about AP being a critic or whatever. I always wanted that critical feedback to tell me that this was possible. And I didn't really know anybody whom I would consider to be sort of worthy of that whip, right? I mean, listen, if you need to whip me, you better have some standing to hold that whip. Right?
No one told me I was signing up for to whip you. I'm not getting involved in what you do in your private life.
I mean, listen, AP, I'm as kinky as they come, right? So I need to sort of use whatever I can for my sort of fantasies later. But anyway,
boys, it's the family channel. Family channel, guys.
Exactly. I will bring this towards a far more sort of PG-13 oriented. AP has a way of, go on.
Well, Nilan, I appreciate what you said regarding the Malazan stuff as literature and all the rest.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have to tell you, I can't wait for my gravesite to become a shrine. I mean, it's like my one ambition.
So I will turn up there with a bottle of sake or whatever it is that's meant to sort of denote friendship or whatever. I mean, we are Japanese, so I can't really use sake, I suppose. But I will turn up at your gravesite, Mr. Erickson. I mean, this is of course assuming that I make the journey of life. But right, if I do, I will certainly turn up there, and I will sort of attempt a Baukelane type necromancy revival ritual. And when people look at me like I'm mad, I will look back at them and I will tell them that I don't really care, because that corpse and I know that this is extremely funny.
Well, also, I think, what we could do is build an azath over his grave if we're still around.
There we go.
Yeah. Are you guys still there? Oh,
we're all here.
We're all there. Okay, good. What we should do is build an azath over your grave if we're around to do that, perform that function. So, but I also want to say, while I have a chance, I think over the years, I've had a lot of people look at my writing, and I'm very grateful to every single one. But I would say that you're very fortunate, and I feel very fortunate to have had AP's eyes on my writing, because there are very few people who can analyze a work of literature of that sort in that way, that well. So
I like my whip metaphor a bit better, Philip, but yes, I agree with you.
Okay, we'll stay with the whips if you want. Yeah.
No whips. I am not getting involved in whips.
Bit of leather.
Malazan, did you actually enjoy the writing experience of fiction? Like, do you feel it somehow, does it feel different from writing nonfiction?
It feels completely different. It feels far more fun, but it also feels far more frightening, because with nonfiction, I know that if I have a logical, analytical, factually sound argument, it doesn't really matter who the audience is. It doesn't matter. I have a sound, logical argument that I presented with well-researched facts. So regardless of how controversial I did one on whether the Chinese should be involved in genetic engineering, and that was extremely controversial, but I felt zero nerves when I wrote that, because it was well-researched and it had a valid point. Whereas when I wrote fiction, it's almost like you're coming up with a recipe, but you can't taste it. You're cooking something, but you can't really taste it. You think it's tasty because it's the type of food that you would eat, but for some reason you have this fear that if you show it to someone else, they would just spit it out. So, and when you have Gordon Ramsay willing to taste it for you, right, and willing to tell you whether it's shit or not, you just take that opportunity. And thankfully, Gordon Ramsay thought it was that it was edible. For me, writing the comedy bits was the most enjoyable. The writing the funny bits, the ones that made me laugh and will hopefully make the readers laugh. I thought I was going to have a blast writing the action sequences. And I mean, I suck at action sequences. Unfortunately, I'm trying to get better. What I did was, so I heard this advice that you need to write out things that you admire, so that you kind of get the tone and all that. So I took a couple of things. So from the Malazan series, I took the prologue of Midnight Tides with the sky keeps collapsing, blah, blah, blah. I also took the Naruk attack in Dust of Dreams, where you keep seeing this phalanx advancing, but you have no idea what it is. And once it's too close, you're like, what the fuck is that shit? And I took a couple from some of the espionage writers. I grew up reading Tom Clancy, Robert Ludlum, a few of those guys. So I would say it's improved my skill a little bit. But overall, I find myself far more comfortable writing humor and not comfortable at all writing action, even though it's these big action scenes that I want to write.
Well, I mean, the key to all of this, you mentioned all these first pages. The key to any kind of sort of storytelling is to finish what you start, because as you say, the first page, it comes out very quickly, very easily. But of course, with each line, with each detail you put in, you're narrowing down the scope of where you can go in the story, and that's when it starts getting hard. So it's finishing what you start is the key.
Yeah, I heard you say that in your conversation with Jimmy Nuts. I was there for bits of that live discussion as well, and you guys were discussing the sort of the boost that you get when you get to that point where you can write the end. So
yeah,
I mean, I guess it requires. My problem is that I've always struggled with discipline, as sort of just with all of my projects. I have a lot of unfinished projects. I don't really do things on a disciplined, repetitive scale and stuff like that. So maybe this crisis is the moment that I need to capitalize to kind of change my ways. Because, and to be fair, that episode with that conversation that you had with you and Jimmy Nuts, because he was, if I'm not mistaken, he's writing something as well, and you were giving him a lot of advice about taking stuff from his own experiences. You were like, just imagine a pro wrestling locker room and just make those guys sort of your characters, right? I thought that was great. I mean, because I know a lot of weird, interesting people in the army and in law enforcement and stuff like that. So my story is essentially about a guy trying to start a war because he's bored. So that's the one-liner. So the main character is trying to start a war because he is bored. So yeah. Malazan inspired. Vidal Adaifon is his name.
Well, you know,
Sorry, Steve.
comedy. If the comedy is what's firing up your desire to write the stories, then you have to embrace that and just go with it. Action scenes can be the stuff that's happening, you know, behind the characters, and it need not be something that you'd have to focus on. You just run with the comedy, and you know, the rest is backdrop.
Yeah. I always say it's the way I want to market this is Baukelane meets Frederick Forsyth, because Baukelane and Frederick Forsyth are big influences, but unfortunately in the modern day, no one's going to know that. I've got to say, I don't know, Terry Pratchett meets Tom Clancy or something like that, right? I've got to come up with two sort of names that I like, that I respect, that I've read, but that don't really have a personal connection with me, whereas Baukelane meets Frederick Forsyth is what I was actually going for.
Oh, it sounds good. I mean, it sounds like a fun premise, because the absurdity of war is certainly something it's got a strong literary tradition. So got something good to run with, for sure.
And everybody in the story is anti-war except the main character, who's extremely pro-war because he finds it entertaining. So it's got some philosophizing with a fascist twist as well, I suppose.
Okay, but don't talk it out. If you talk it out too much, right, it drains it of its energy.
Okay.
Yeah, be cagey on that stuff. Don't give a lot away.
I was thinking of some of those great books like Catch 22 by Helen. So it's deeply comic and deeply tragic, and the focus is obviously war, but it's not about the action of war. It's about the people involved in it. It's about the repercussions. It's about how people feel. Even the TV show MASH, again, all about war. Lots and lots of comedy and humor and laughs, and then the deep tragic elements of it. That, again, there's, even in the darkest of subjects, they can be approached in a very meaningful way with humor. And I think sometimes we can get a little a little upset because something is so serious. We go, how can you turn it into a joke? And it's not about turning that into a joke. It's using humor as a way to either understand or to cope, because we use humor an awful lot of the time as a way to laugh at the darkness, to bring light to it, to give us some handle that allows us to carry on, even though it is dark and it is oppressing and it is beating us down. That finding those elements of humor, even very dark humor, like Catch-22, that is a way of almost a protective shell to allow us to keep going. So I think having humor in something about war and about the darkness of war, or why wars happen and what people are doing, that they aren't necessarily antithetical at all. They actually can go together very, very well.
Yeah, we
I think Glenn
talked
Cook
about that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think Glenn Cook does that even in The Black Company. The first book it's not about the slap down, drag 'em out battle sequences. It's all about everything that's going on all around it.
Yeah.
And some of the humor, of course, comes through in Croker's voice as well. So even in fantasy, that can be pulled off.
And Neelan and I talked about that for a while, actually, in a Malazan context. So yeah. Yep.
Of course we did.
Well, we couldn't talk about Bokelane and Corbel Broach and not talk about Malazan humor. So yeah.
But again, like all types of humor, like humor is hit and miss for different people. And even then, like, there are some jokes and some funny aspects in Catch-22 that are, one person will go, this is absolutely brilliant, and 2 chapters later, the next joke will fall flat. And it's not because it's a bad joke. It's not necessarily because it's a bad joke or a bad attempt at humor. It's that humor doesn't resonate with the reader. And I think one of the things that can be very difficult for us when we are reading is if we don't get that type of humor, we go, this should never have been included. You go, well, I'm not every single reader on the planet. And trying to universalize our experience, going, this is what must be there, or this should be, or this shouldn't be. And this is sort of the difference between sort of like a critical reading, where I can read something and go, I can see the value in it, even if it's not meeting my personal preferences. And there can be a massive difference between those two things, but it is more common for us to always talk about our personal preferences and almost universalize them, because this is my judgment. I am backing up my judgment because this is how everyone is going to feel about it. And it sort of gives us defense for why we have taken a position.
Some people don't find the tea standy funny. Can you believe it? Those hilarious balls of sunshine. Come on, what is the world coming to?
No kidding.
So, I look at on that humor point as well, right? I mean, whatever, you guys are here, so we might as well talk. We might as well talk Malazan. Right? Even within the fan community, look at the people who love Krupp, who hate Krupp, who like Iskara Al-Post, who hate him. I mean, with me, the thing is, so I think with Iskara Al-Post, I've gotten like Stockholm syndrome at this point, where I'm like, okay, yeah, he's funny, guys. Yeah, he's funny. All right. Right. He's bludgeoned me into submission at this point, where by the end of Toll the Hounds, I was like, okay, when he almost gets Dragnipoor and all that, I was like, okay, fine, this guy's funny, uncle. I give up. Whereas with some characters like Krupp, for instance, for me, I've just gone back and forth on that character so many times. There have been so many points in my Malazan journey where I've been like, this guy's really funny. I hate this guy. Oh no, he's actually quite funny. Oh no, I was right. This guy's, I can't stand him. And what was I thinking? So it just goes through. Whereas there are some characters like Tihol, where it's just on point whenever he's on the page. Like Hellion, where it's on point whenever she's on the page. Whereas some types of humor, I guess, because it's so over the top and because it's so it has to be over the top, right? Because all of them can't be funny in the same way. And that's one of the things I was telling Philip about humor in the Malazan series as well. It's quite easy. I mean, it's not easy. It's difficult to write a series with multiple funny characters. That's hard enough. But writing characters who are funny in different ways. Now, and that's another reason why, Mr. Erickson, you need to sort of improve your work ethic on the Baukelin stories as well, right? Because one of the other things that make those stories enjoyable is that there are many people who are funny in many different ways. Even in the last one, what's that isolationist guy whom Kobel wrote? Okay, I won't go into the sort of the one preparing for the apocalypse.
No,
and he
right.
kind of lives by himself. Yeah, the survivalist, exactly. That was the word that I was looking for. You get so many of these. It's zany, grotesque humor is how Philip and I described it earlier. It's like Monty Python, but it's kind of got this macabre Edgar Allan Poe type whatever. By the way, Mr. Erickson, I need to thank you for recommending The Raven. I watched it after you mentioned it in one of your comments. What an enjoyable movie. The end was just a complete masterpiece. I mean, I remember growing up watching mythological movies in my own mother tongue, where they would have these fights between deities and all that, where one throws the necklace, it turns into a snake, the other throws the ring and it turns into an eagle, which then kills the snake and all that. It was so fun to watch that type of fantasy. Anyway, Philip, you need to stop in at some point and kind of bring some context to this, Philip, because I will keep rambling until I reach that moment where I've forgotten my initial point. So you need to be a host, Philip. Come on, man, do your job.
This is Ruthan Badd. This is all about you, my friend. So it's your moment.
It's a bit too much about me for my liking, to be honest.
Neela, I remember a television show that back in the UK, I think it was on Channel 4, and I think it was based on Indian mythology, and all I can remember of it, where it was the gods were fighting, and it was a serialized thing. It was on every week.
Must have been the Mahabharata.
Mahabharata.
Yeah.
But all I can remember from it, my one memory of it, is a guy goes to and he pulls back the bow and arrow, and he looses the arrow, and then the arrow suddenly is lots of arrows in the sky, and that was how they did it. It was he just would launch one arrow, and then suddenly there was a shot of, look, all these arrows, and then they just cut, and it was then and the reaction to it. So they got rid of, you didn't need to see it all happen, it just happened. Well, but I remember watching that.
We believe in show don't tell, AP. that's probably the Mahabharata, because the both Indian epics they pay a lot of attention to the weapons and the quality of the weapons, bows that turn into multiple projectiles, bows that turn into beasts like snakes and eagles and blah blah, arrows that can destroy the world, which then have to be removed from the war through political machinations. So I mean, it's big budget in terms of conceptualization, but shoestring budget in terms of how we decide to shoot it. So you've got to excuse all that, AP.
But culturally, immensely important series. Yeah.
But what I find amazing about it is there's been a lot of focus on, when we talk about like stuff in cinema or on TV, how, this looks really expensive, and focusing on all of these looks. And then I think back to some of the most powerful films or television shows that I saw, and you go, like, the sets were made out of paper mache. You could see how bad they were. But the stories and the acting were so compelling that, yeah, sure, it would have been nice for it to look really all glitzy and full of glamour. But because the heart was in the characters and in their portrayal and in the storytelling, that how it looked was the smallest fraction of how important it was. And good storytelling, I think the storytelling that transcends time and place is the stuff that focuses on that aspect, because you can dress it up whatever way you want, but if the heart isn't good, if the story or the characters or the central aspect that's being explored, if that's not powerful, it doesn't matter how beautiful you make it, it still will feel like a beautiful, empty, hollow shell that is disposable.
Well, I mean, yeah, you look at the Raven. It was, they had already finished filming their primary film, and then they just had sort of extra time with the actors and all the rest, and they just decided to do the Raven, just out of the blue. And yeah, the special effects are yeah, they're pretty horrendous, but it makes no difference. You know, I mean, Peter Lorre dressed as a Raven in his Raven suit is all you needed, because it's all down to the characters. And I think the thing that impressed me most about Corman in that is he's almost saw Poe as a barrel of laughs. And you know, if you read Edgar Allan Poe, there's nothing of that in there. But he saw it that way, and he had, you know, brilliant actors. I mean, Boris Karloff and Vincent Price were extraordinary. And so he had everything he needed to make that film, except the budget. And it didn't matter. It's a fantastic film. So, wow. And funny, very funny.
So
it had that Roger Corman look as well, because it was so low budget. Yeah, go on, Philip. You were.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, now that we've utterly demolished the false narrative that you'll never be in a video discussion with Steven Erikson.
You thwarted me, Philip. You really did sort of. You did a number on me, right? After the sort of the hilarious story I gave you for why Steven Erikson and I cannot be in a video together. Yeah. I can't believe you garroted me from the back. You put a knife in there, and you sort of you insulted my entire lineage along with that film.
Well, my nemesis is always implying that I am a sneaky fellow, so I guess maybe there's some truth to that.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say this really shows you who your real friends are in life. AP, I owe you an apology.
Thank you very much. How many times have I said that Philip is actually an evil genius? And everyone's, oh no, he's not. Well, there was that one time that he did this thing, but oh no, that's completely out of the blue. And then the next person says the same thing, and you go, look at the pattern of behavior. You all think he's nice, and yet he always does something nefarious. I don't know why anyone else can't see it.
Yes, but AP, it's also a time for self-reflection, because the fact that a guy like this could get away with a good guy persona simply because he's paired up with you, that does mean that a lot of introspection is required on your part as well. You just can't deny that.
I am a perfect angel.
Exactly, which is why people think Philip's whatever he is. Yes, because you come off as such a what do I say? I mean, to be fair, what would be the right term for AP though? Because AP kind of has this. AP, you are what I imagine the alter ego of a supervillain would be when he's trying to blend in with society. You're kind of like that, right? So you are.
I'm a supervillain's Clark Kent. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Exactly. You are a supervillain's Clark Kent. You are how a supervillain would see humanity. Your face, your disguise is precisely that. People would think I'm joking, right? And the weird part is I'm not.
Oh dear. I honestly, I don't know where to go with that because
I'm convinced.
There's no defense. Yeah.
You have all the ingredients, AP. You've named yourself a critical dragon, which of course is it's a kind of sign of power and subtle aggression, but at the same time it's critical aggression. It's not unfettered aggression. You have done passive aggressive. I mean, passive aggressive is a bit too, I mean, I wouldn't be cruel, AP. Passive aggressive is a bit too mediocre for you. It's not colorful enough to describe what your Machiavellian sort of techniques, but you have bashed a wide variety of people without actually make it known that you've been bashing them. I mean, some of your prologue analysis, let me just put it that way, right? They're extremely, as a lawyer, as a sort of a trained lawyer myself, it's a great example of how you can pretend to be looking at something neutrally, and how you can fool an audience into thinking that you're looking at something neutrally, but behind the scenes, you're just smacking the person who wrote what you're actually analyzing. So those tricks, those sort of techniques, those superpowers.
I have come to bury Caesar, not to praise him.
This is
yes,
what,
I mean, go on.
This is what the word nefarious was coined for, I believe. Yeah.
So I was just going to say, AP, you make my job easier as well, right? You make my job easier by making those observations, because it's very clear that much like a murder suspect who has committed the murder, you have already thought of the alibis, and you've already thought of the counter arguments and all that. And as you can tell from the complicit silence of both your colleagues here, AP, I do have the agreement of our co-panelists here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Reading silence as acquiescence. You should know you should never do that. Silence isn't necessarily complicity nor agreement.
When Ruthan Badd tells you that you're a bad person, you have problems.
But that's only from your non-Western perspective.
Which is true. But let's face it, my non-Western perspective can often be a far more global perspective than what many people bring to the table. So I will once again flash my anti-colonial card, AP. How dare you check me?
But excuse me, if we're going to talk about levels of colonialism experienced, I think maybe I have some element that I can at least partially hold that card, given where I'm from.
That's true. I mean, you do pass the ideology test. It's just you just don't pass the melanin test, but you certainly your culture certainly does pass the ideology test. I will give your people that.
Yeah. So Ruthan Badd, do you have any final words or questions for Mr. Erickson, perhaps, now that you are having this opportunity?
So, I mean, listen, I've already made my position very clear, which is that I'm extremely grateful for Mr. Erickson's literary career. And of course, I'm grateful for Mr. Erickson's presence here, right? But the Baukelane stories, once again, I'm not being facetious, right? I actually mean that. And I've been mentioning these stories right from the early days of my channel. It's not even been a year and a half, but I've been mentioning this from the time I've started uploading content online. The Baukelane stories are really where you need to take things. And if you do decide to end it in 2 stories, if you do decide to sort of play with fire that way, let me put it that way. If you do decide to play with fire, please remember that an AP cameo where unpleasant things happen to AP, which we can then have many pleasant memories of discussing in a 3-way collab, that will do a lot to kind of, that will be the balm which eases the pain of me losing the possibility of more Baukelane stories. So please do keep that in mind, right? Because I remember AP being quite happy the last time we had a chat about this, that the AP character had kind of escaped.
He slithered out. He slithered his way out.
Slithered out is the term that I was looking for.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if you could unslither some of that slime, it would be great, right? The fight between Apto and Apo in Crackpot Trail is one of the funniest fight scenes that I've read, where the natural sliminess of the critic kind of saves him, and he kind of weaves out of the way and all that. So you could of course add in stuff like that to make your friend happy, but eventually a bad fate that we can all laugh for. That, Mr. Erickson, would be what I ask of you. Of course, my actual wish would be to whatever be Bauclane's rival or whatever in a Bauclane story, but in the realm of, outside the realm of the fantastical and in the realm of what's possible, a bad death for the Apto Cannavalian character would certainly be appreciated. And that is how I would like to end my Dear Dr. Fantasy with Philip Chase, right? By asking Steven Erickson to give AP's alter ego a humiliating death.
Well, I think
Quite
that's
poetic, if you ask me.
very fitting ending. Any final words, AP or Apto? Sorry.
Thank you so much for that. Like he needed any more encouragement to torture a character that bears a passing similarity to myself, just coincidentally. Thank you for that, Neela, and thank you so much for the continuing conversations that we have.
Oh my goodness, my jaw is killing me. Steve, would you like to say anything in departing?
I don't know if I think Apto might be making a reappearance somewhere in the last two books.
Yay!
Last two novellas. As to his fate, well, we'll just have to. I tend to make it up on the fly, so we'll see what happens to Apto Cannavalian. But I mean, the whole thing about critics is that you can crush them down and they pop up somewhere else, and it's kind of a hopeless task in that respect. So.
Are you suggesting there's death of the author, but it's the critic is immortal?
Oh,
more like a weed, I think
Absolutely.
he's saying. Not immoral, just like a weed. Yeah.
An amoeba.
All right, gentlemen. I will be signing off now. Thank you all for coming. And Ruthan Badd, this has been such a great honor and pleasure. So wonderful to see you and talk.
Philip,
with
just
you.
give me a serious moment for me to thank you, Philip, because it's been a complete pleasure. Thank you for inviting me for this. Thank you for this surprise, which I was already looking forward to having a conversation with you, because I'm a big fan of the series that you're doing. But the fact that you got our mutual nemesis here, and the fact that you have the most influential content creator in terms of my own personal life, the fact that you brought him here is extremely meaningful to me, right? I am not the type of person to express that unless it's coached in sarcasm and violent humor and stuff like that, which I think is quite apparent in this conversation. So it's just been such a huge honor for me, Philip. Mr. Erickson, Mr. Canavan, Dr. A.P. Canavan, Dr. Philip Chase, Mr. Steven Erickson. Are you Dr. Mr. Erickson? I
No,
wouldn't want
no.
to do you a disservice. Okay.
No.
Okay. So you're just a civilian like I am, but hopefully I will be a higher being than you soon. But yes, thank you. Thank you, guys. That's all I have to say.
All right, this was
Well, I was curious, Ruthan, when is your next essay showing up on YouTube?
So I'm thinking of doing something on how redeemable evil is in the 10 big books, and just picking out a couple of really evil characters like Calor and going through whether they are actually redeemable or not when we look at the 10 big books.
Oh, mind me, I'm just making some notes about a video I'm going to record tomorrow.
AP, I've done that to you like 4 times, so you can go ahead with it. Don't worry about that, right? I've kind of railroaded you many times. So hopefully before the month ends, so once I set things up here in India and once I get some stuff going here, so hopefully there will be a video this month on that. Yeah.
So are you planning on like settling where you are right now, or?
It might take a while for things to get better back there. It might take a year, or it might take 2 months. I'm not too sure. But I was already in a career transition phase when I was there, and I was looking for new things to do. And the fact that things have just come to a standstill there that's probably a sign that, so I've just registered my company name. I went and looked out at, I took a look at a couple of office spaces. So for now, it looks like I will be setting shop in India for a while. Yes.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Wow. All right. Well, once
Best
again,
of luck.
thank you.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, best of luck. Thank
Hey,
you
it's Mr. Erickson was going to say something about me, Philip. Come on, you're cock blocking me here. He asked me when my video was, right? So I've told him what it is. So I'm waiting for his response.
No, I think that sounds good.
Oh, you didn't cock block me. The guy had nothing to say. Oh, fine. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Oh dear.
I mean, from my perspective, I will, if there's something to comment on in your video, then I will.
Exactly, you will. Yes, you will now. Yes, thank you. I remember that. Yes, I did bring you back from exile, Mr. Erickson. That must have felt good. Anyway, I mean, I'm just joking, Philip. You can cut me off anytime.
Okay, I'm gonna, before
still...
my computer runs out of space for the recording, I'm gonna sign off. But thank you, gentlemen. And we can continue talking after the recording is done. So thank you so much again, Ruthan Badd, Stephen Erickson, AP Canavan, A Critical Dragon. This has been a joy, and thank everybody. Thank you for watching all of this fun, and hopefully you had as good a time as I did. All right, until next time.